Hey everybody, it's Monday, so it's Andrew, and today I am here with Tucker Martine. Hey Tucker, what's going on?
Hey,
Are you
good to
good?
be here.
Thanks, man. So are you, I'm wondering if we have the same weather today. We're a bit overcast, slightly windy, and some rain.
We have that about every 15 minutes, and uh, then the sun peeks through, and we get excited and put our bathing suits on, and then the clouds come back. So yeah, it's kind of been a sampler platter of weather lately.
Right, good. Yeah, so same as here, where if you don't like the weather, just give it 15 minutes, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So thanks so much for coming on here. There's a lot to talk about because you've had a rather interesting life, but you come from some interesting stuff too. So, as with everybody who's on here, I kind of want to start at the very beginning and kind of figure out how you got into what it is you do. So, I think it probably makes sense to start with your dad because I think that's probably a lot about why you do what you do. So,
Yeah, well, it's wild because I that's a natural assumption, and it might be more true than I realized. But in my mind, like, so my father's a songwriter. That's how he's made his living. Like, for those watching that wouldn't know that. Um, but he was very much a behind the scenes songwriter. Like, wrote songs for other people to sing, and
and by other people, we need to include Elvis, you know.
Elvis was one of them. But so I would occasionally go to his demos with him when he would write the song, usually record it onto a cassette on a boombox, and then like decide who he thought like a good singer would be. Nashville's full of them, people that were aspiring stars that were kind of making ends meet by doing demos for hire. So, if it was a song for that he was hoping Reba McEntire would sing, he would try to find someone that could get the message across to Reba and her producer or management or label, whomever was going to be making that decision. So I went to some demo sessions with him, and I just I sat quietly in the back. And I did eventually, I mean, at first it was like just I had to go along with my dad to work because I couldn't be at home alone or something. But um, I started to realize that those spaces there was something kind of cool and magical about them and mysterious, and what the hell's going on? That person's in the other room making a sound, but we're listening to it in here, and all the different ways that it could change. And I mean, that planted the seed. So that definitely connects with my father. But he's never produced a record. He's never engineered a note. He did set the example, though, of like, have your dream and go for it. And he let us know, like, yeah, if you choose a path like the arts, it will probably kick your ass, and you better be prepared, to have your heart broken again and again, and
Right.
go all in, and still maybe never make it work. Um, I mean, not that he wasn't hammered, but he let us know that that's part of what you're choosing. But if that's what we chose, then they supported it fully. And so yeah, I mean, I have to give him a lot of credit for it, but he certainly never suggested it, or even told me about record production or engineering or anything.
I think more it's everybody seems to have not necessarily a specific moment, but this just sort of realization of what studios are. And as you're saying, just sitting in that room and realizing, like, hold on, someone's in there doing something. We're hearing it sound like hyper real in here. And if I go out there, that doesn't sound like that. And so just the idea that
Right.
that even exists, I think, is figuring that out. And it's interesting that how many people just immediately connect to that. Like, that is immediately fascinating and drives people for their entire lives.
Yeah. Yeah. I think for me too, there was a little bit of a delay. Like, that happened, but it wasn't like I was like, all right, that's it. I'm going to pursue this as a career. In fact, my high school, Hillsborough High School in Nashville, Tennessee, had a recording studio program. And I did not take
Wow.
that program. Yeah. Well, it was kind of a laughing stock at that point, because the teacher, he was in charge of all the audio. He was like the head audio guy at the Grand Ole Opry, and he had to deal with the school that like he could just be gone whenever he needed to tend to his job. And it turned out to be like 95 times. So it became the class that like all the stoners took, because you didn't have to do anything and you could like, you know, hang out outside and smoke pot or whatever. But yeah, it's kind of wild for me to think that I went to one of the only high schools with a recording studio program and didn't take it. And then eventually, you know, pursued this as my livelihood. But it came because I was playing drums in bands starting in about 5th grade. And, you know, I was the drummer who always had a lot of opinions about arrangement and, you know, just everything. I wasn't just the shut up and play the beat drummer, which was fine, because I was playing with people who we were going for the band thing. Like,
Right.
you know, looked up to like R.E.M. and U2 and these guys who were like, they weren't like session cats who were like joining a band. They were like kids in a gang together or whatever. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
So, I mean, I would record the rehearsals in the beginning just with the boombox, and then eventually we got a little CDPA, and I figured out how to hook that up to my cassette deck, and then I would, you know, listen to those back. Every once in a while, I would get lucky, and 1 or 2 of the instruments would sound pretty good, and then I got more curious over time, like, how can I make the other instruments sound good, and how come the drums didn't sound good today, even though they sounded good last time? So my interest there was more just to try to have a better band and also have a better recording to showcase our band, so I could take it to the clubs to try to get a gig at the club, you know, that sort of thing. But eventually, as I listened to more and more records and just my brain matured and my grasp on like the artistic process evolved, I started to piece little things together, like, how the hell did they get that sound? And how come this guy's name, you know, I remember Daniel Lanois was one of the first guys whose name I was like, wait, that's on this U2 record, but then here's also his own record, and there's kind of a feeling in here that's similar. There's like a space going on that's speaking to me. And then, you know, found the ambient records that he did with Brian Eno.
Right.
And those, you know, those related in some ways to even these big pop records. Like there's moments on the Joshua Tree that, you know, they were definitely using some of those colors of the palette, like the ambient thing. And so it was this gradual process of connecting those dots, and then, you know, having already started experimenting a little bit with recording and not having realized it.
And so this is sort of like junior high school you're talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, the whole thing, like I started playing drums in 5th grade, but I immediately was in a band that was gigging. So yeah, it was this trajectory from then, like through high school.
I love that you're immediately gigging in 5th grade. Now, was the whole band in 5th grade?
Yeah.
And this is Wet Dog Zone.
Man, someone's doing their research.
Well, you know, the shit lives on the internet.
Well, I didn't even know that lived on the internet. I
So,
thought it was on.
well, we haven't even talked about Rub the Buddha, but back to Wet Dog Zone. So, like, what kind of gigs are you doing when you're all in 5th grade? Are you just playing for other 5th graders, like at their parties, or what are you doing?
It was crazy. So first of all, I basically learned to play the drums because I had a friend who was learning to play the guitar, and you know, one day I was at his house and he was playing like Van Halen songs with power chords through a shitty little like 4-inch speaker starter amp. And in my mind, like he might as well have been Eddie Van Halen. I was just like, are you kidding me? Like I know someone who can do that. And then this friend of ours learned bass. Learned just enough, like the most rudimentary bass to just follow the notes along with him. But still, I was like, holy shit, all you guys need is drums, and like this thing's gonna go off. So I'd already been interested in drums, but you know how it is when you're young, you're interested in a lot of things, and like, well, to get a drum kit, yeah, that involves
That's a
money.
commitment.
And so, but that really motivated me. So I was always a kid who was working like many jobs on the weekend as I could to just earn some money, have some independence. And I got a drum kit and immediately just started learning the songs that my friends were learning. Like that's how I taught myself. And, it wasn't the most complex music ever, but certainly I wasn't doing a great job at it, I'm sure, in 5th grade. But there was kind of a novelty. I mean, hopefully it was slightly more than a novelty, but also that these 5th graders, like, were pretty decent. And we were fairly hip. Like, we were playing like what was really hip to the college kids. So we'd get hired for college fraternity gigs at Vanderbilt. And we definitely got to do, we were the go-to for 8th grade combo parties and a lot of big high school parties. We had a little moment where we were the cool thing, and I got paid better for the most part, like, than any other band I've ever been in since.
That's hilarious. So at 13, playing for the high school girls, thinking that's pretty badass.
Thinking I was pretty badass, which is hilarious because, only a few years later, I realized I wasn't, and I've never recovered since.
Oh, I don't know about that. I think you're still badass. So, all right. So you get out of high school. You immediately, I'm assuming this was the I have to get out of Nashville thing, went to Boulder. So
yeah.
Why Boulder? What was it that made that decision? Was there somebody already there and you thought that's the place to go?
Yeah, there was. So, but I should add, and speaking of have to get out of my hometown, I packed the car. I had high school graduation. I went home from graduation, packed my car. The next morning, I woke up and I moved away from Nashville. Like, it the earliest moment that that my parents would allow, and that I basically legally could leave. Which wasn't a knock on Nashville, but it was just me knowing, like, I know Nashville, but I also know there's like a whole world out there. Yeah. Nashville's a particular thing. And Nashville also was even really different then too. Like, if you were into weirder music than Music Row, it was hard to find like people. And I went to Boulder because my older brother was in school at University of Colorado and he played bass. And by then we had kind of hatched a plan that we'd start a band and take over the world. But he was committed to seeing college through. So, he couldn't move anywhere else at the time. And I was happy to go there. It's beautiful. I was really into the beats and stuff at the time, and Kerouac and Burroughs and all those guys. Neil Cass spent a lot of time in Boulder. So that had a draw.
Well, all right. So this brings us to somebody I definitely want to hear more about, because you were hanging out with Harry Smith, and was that in Boulder?
Yes.
So I know a little bit about him. I mean, the thing that seems craziest to me is that his record collection ended up being the Folkways Anthology, and that the engineer on that project was Bela Bartok's son. Like, that's the what the hell just happened kind of moment thing. But he was into a lot of really crazy shit and experimental films and Kabbalah and stuff like that. And so obviously there was some shared interest, but how'd you meet him and what sort of influence did he have? And like, what was that about really?
Yeah. So it's wild. And I'm already noticing kind of a theme of me connecting dots kind of after the fact, because I'll tell you a little about my time with him and how I met him, but really my deep, deep appreciation for him and my realizing kind of like why our paths crossed didn't come till much later when he had died, and I just was pursuing my interests further, and roads would lead back to him. I was like, that's the freaking guy that I would hang out with on my break, coffee shop, So I worked at a coffee shop / bookstore in Boulder called the Trident Cafe. It's still there. It's owned by Buddhists. It's the bookstore kind of has Buddhist leanings, and there's Boulder's a big Buddhist town. So it kind of was like a hub for that community. And the Naropa Institute is there, which is a kind of a Buddhist leaning school for creative, writing and all kinds of stuff. But so that's why Harry Smith was living there. They had basically at that point, he was retired. He had taught there a bit, but they had just offered to just house him. They were like, we've got an apartment. You're a legend. You can't really seem to take care of yourself that well. You know, here's a place to live. And so he would come into the coffee shop every single day and just kind of sit in this little corner, usually dressed really nice. You know, had a very handsome beard, much like yourself. And
Wow.
And my boss really kind of took me under his wing. And, you know, I was 18 at the time, and he said, like, see that guy over there in the corner with the pinstripe, like the candy man suit on, who's sorting pills on the table, like by color or whatever. like you should go sit with that man and talk to him on your breaks. He's a fascinating guy, and, you know, you'd be doing yourself a favor if you did. And, you know, I've never considered myself the most outgoing guy, but I really kind of could feel that this guy was looking out for me, and that, you know, I should do what he says. So I just sat there one day, and Harry just started talking as if, you know, I'd known him forever. I mean, I don't even think he looked up for an hour when I sat at the table. I don't even think he saw me, but he started talking to me. And then eventually asked for my phone number, and God, I wish I still had those cassettes, you know, from voicemail. He left many wild messages. Apparently he had a couple of cats, and they were multiplying at a rate that he could not contain. So he's of cats in his little apartment. He was desperately trying to get rid of them. So there were all these messages from him trying to give me cats. And he was telling me about already had their basic Buddhist training and stuff. But mostly I just listened to him just go off about whatever he was thinking about that day. And a lot of it was above my head. It was either above my head, or he was just so out at the time that, like, it didn't make much sense. But I mean, I'm gonna give him the credit that probably it was just all fascinating stuff above my head that I wish I could rewind and play back. But so, you know, I knew that he was this legend of experimental film, and I knew that he kind of was in the mix with all of this, you know, the like surrealists and experimental artists of the 50s, 60s, 70s. But I didn't really know that he had been such a voracious, like, archivist of music till after he died.
Wow.
Really into field recording and stuff. And I learned, you know, that he had done a lot. Like he would go to, you know, peyote ceremonies and, like, you know, remote Native American communities, and kind of befriend them and earn their trust and document some of their rituals and songs and stuff, because, you know, he believed that they should survive, but also I think he just had this insatiable appetite to, like, discover other cultures in order to inform his own. You know, he didn't want to just be a regular American guy, I guess. So, you know, I got deep into field recording and collecting field recordings, and Folkways had released a ton of his stuff. In fact, I think he just kind of had a deal with them for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, the story that I saw was that he at one point needed money, and so he took his record collection to Folkways and said, "Hey, why don't I donate this to you so you can archive it?" And they had a look through and said, "No, you're going to curate it and turn it into something," because it was that extensive and that much stuff that nobody else had.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I don't know if he knew it or not, you know, but he basically compiled the definitive collection of American folk music from that era.
Yeah, just amazing. So, yeah. All right, well, come back to your field recordings, because I definitely want to talk about that. But I want to back up a little bit, because at the same time, so you had a DJ gig in Boulder, right? And
DJ at the time meant you were at a radio station playing music.
Yes, the old school playing records on the radio. And the internet is full of half sentences and quarter truths. But apparently, you were doing, like, mashups on the radio. So what what were you doing? What inspired you to do it? How long did you get away with it? Like, what was the deal with that? Because it's a really interesting thing to be doing then.
Yeah. And well, so I had the graveyard shift. It was like midnight to 6 a.m. So first of all, it kind of felt like hardly anyone was listening. And anyone that was listening is probably just some weirdo just like late at night, who knows what they're into, but they want to turn the radio on. And this station was known for being fairly adventurous. So, they wanted to turn that on and like, here's some weird stuff, then they weren't flipping it on to hear the hits of the day. So, and it was just at the same time where the confluence of my interest in, just as a music fanatic, but also, being interested in recording and kind of learning, even though I didn't have a multi-track yet, I was learning about the ideas of layering things and how the possibilities are endless. And I wanted to mess around with that, but I couldn't afford, at the time, we didn't all just have a laptop that came with some kind of software. So I was saving up for a 1/4-inch reel-to-reel 4-track, but it was just kind of a way for me to explore my interests. They had an incredible library. So I would, all day when I wasn't at work, I'd be reading about music and making notes about things I was interested in and connecting dots. Like, this person played on this person produced that. And then I would go a couple hours early to the station and find all those records and pull them out and just like start playing them on the air. And I just loved the possibilities of, because at that point also I was really into kind of minimalist stuff, including ambient things, but experimental things, John Cage and the like. But I learned that a lot of that layered really well with more dense stuff, especially like field recordings from, that were mostly just percussion oriented from Africa or Japan or wherever it might be. They weren't going to really conflict harmonically with like something more in the tonal ambient realm. And it was just a blast trying stuff out. And nobody was telling me that I couldn't do it. I think the station was just glad somebody's willing to stay up all night.
Just keep them on the air.
But it was, it was huge for me. Not only getting to experiment with the sounds, but being able to, again, I know I'm sounding like the old uncle or whatever, but like, if you wanted to check out music you were interested in, you had to buy it. And half the stuff you couldn't even buy anymore, and if you could, it was going to be some obscure mail order place. Like, it wasn't the one record store in Boulder, Colorado. So it was incredible for me, like, just to have access to the library and check out anything I want.
Yeah, I mean, that hadn't even really occurred to me, but that's absolutely it. I mean, we'd save up, and if we were lucky, we could afford to buy one record a week, but usually it was every 2 or 3 weeks or something like that, and you'd be swapping them with your friends. But to all of a sudden have access to, I would imagine, 100,000 records covering everything. I mean, that's incredible for then. And so what years are we talking? Is this sort of late 80s, early 90s?
Well, I graduated high school in 90 and went there immediately. So it's like 90 through 90, the end of 92.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's amazing.
10 years because of it was just so formative, but it was, looking back, it was just a couple of years, but I was cramming a lot in.
So obviously some of those recordings got you into the idea of doing your own field recording. So how did you get into that? What did you use? Where'd you go? Like, did you have a list of things you wanted to get, or did you just sort of discover things, or what was that about?
Well, again, at the time, the options were really limited, and most recording gear at all was pro. It was for professionals. It was for either radio stations or schools, organizations with a real budget to buy this really expensive stuff. But around that time, Sony came out with their first. It was called the Professional Walkman. It was cassette, but it had a little meter on it.
Yeah, red LEDs.
It had Dolby. It had recording levels, just the basics, and it could run on 4 AA batteries. And that just opened the universe to me, that I could just walk, like anywhere I went, I could record the sound that I was hearing. I know it sounds so silly now. We all have phones in our pockets where we can do that, but that's what it is.
Yeah, and it's not that long ago, but you couldn't do it.
Yeah. And it was, it really, like I said, it just opened up whole worlds to me. And, I try to never really get over the wonder of that, right? The wonder of just like being fascinated by sounds out in the world, and the thought that we can capture them if we want. We can then, have a little library that we can integrate into things. I mean, I would eventually start to plunder some of those recordings for, when I started recording bands and songwriters and whatever, like, occasionally I had the audacity to be like, hey, what if we brought in this rushing water, in that one section where it kind of seems empty, or, whatever the sounds were. So I started just by walking around and recording the sounds in my environment, but eventually would save up to go. I went to Morocco in '94, and we went to Mali a couple years later, and then I went to Turkey. I just, I wanted to be in environments where even the everyday sounds were totally unfamiliar to me. And I used my little field recorder, like, a lot of people travel with a camera, right? And they're just like, whoa, look at that, take a picture, I didn't have a camera with me. I just had my little, and I had an Audio-Technica mic. It was the AT822, I want to say. It was a stereo mic. And that was also amazing, like to be able to, I'd have headphones on and I could position it so I could just kind of create the stereo field. You'd move like 1 or 2 inches and you'd feel it shift dramatically. So that was really cool, getting to experiment with that. And then the idea that you're basically you're recording and mixing at the same time is something, these days when often we'll get sessions with like 90 tracks or something, I'm like, it blows my mind that there are a lot of fascinating recordings out there that are just immediate and require.
And so do you still do it? Do you still record when you go places?
I do. I mean, yeah, but I have a 7 and 10-year-old now, and, my ability to just go to Africa for a month, to go on a vision quest is, I just can't really do it right now. So, I'm not doing it in the same way that I was before, but.
Right. Well, if you get back into it, have you seen the Hook Audio? I can't remember what they actually call the microphone, but it's over ear, and it's a binaural recorder that also works Bluetooth, so you can record to your phone with or without video, and it's binaural, and it actually sounds really good, and people can't see it, which helps.
Huge, because I mean, I was, my trips to Africa were early mid '90s. And even then, as soon as you're a white guy walking around with a microphone, like there's no way you're going to just like kind of meld into the fabric of society and be one of the people and see what it's really like and just get treated like they would be treated or whatever. But it was also a somewhat more innocent time, I mean, fast forward some years later, it just kind of felt more and more like there was this kind of disdain for Americans happening globally. And not to say that, I mean, obviously you can still go all those places and most of the people are amazing and super friendly, and, and I would recommend anyone that wants to do that. But I feel like it would feel a little different now going over there and walking around, like putting a microphone a few feet from somebody while they're going about their daily life. I mean, if it ever seemed at all necessary, I'd certainly ask permission first and all that stuff. But it would feel a little extra invasive now. And there are ethical questions to be asked, I suppose, anyway, just about like white guy going over and checking out this culture and like recording it and bringing it back to his cool little studio and messing around with this. I mean, anytime I recorded musicians and stuff, I always paid them, and it was, you know, it was what they asked for. And if I couldn't pay them what they asked for, then we just didn't do it. But, and this was all money I was earning, you know, waiting tables and stuff. So it was, you know, even if it was $100, like that was huge to me. That was like, I was giving them a good chunk of the money that I had to my name. So hopefully all ethical.
So going from Boulder to, was Seattle, that was the next stop?
Yep.
So obviously your brother stayed in college, so you weren't taking over the world in that band, but you're getting more into recording, discovering tons of music and things. So was the move to Seattle to do something specific again, to like, okay, now I'm going to go make some records, or why there? It's also because you're staying away from music centers, like almost on purpose, which I got no problem with whatsoever, living out in the middle of nowhere right now, but I spent my time in LA. So I'm just curious, why Seattle, and what was it like? Was there a plan, or it was just like that's the next thing?
I mean, as much of a plan as I think a 20-year-old can have, or at least this 20-year-old could have. But so I visited Seattle. So when I left Boulder, I'd saved up some money to just travel around the country, sleeping in the back of my pickup truck for about 4 months and just seeing places I'd always wanted to see, and, you know, visiting a few places I'd already been that I loved, and just connecting wherever I had friends, go stay with them, check that place out for a day or two or 3 or 4, whatever felt right. Seattle was a stop along the way, and it was just going to be a stop, you know. I was going to just hit that corner and then start heading to the coast, and it just felt amazing. Like within the first day, I met these guys that owned this little record store called Wall of Sound that's still there, and it was just dedicated to kind of experimental, sort of, you know, left of center music. Very small, but very curated, and you could listen to anything. And I made friends with them right away, and then they started recommending stuff to me to check out, and it was just, I was like, yes, this is my, you know, this is my store. These are my people. This is my music. And then I also realized at the time, like Bill Frisell, who's a, you know, someone I really admired at the time and still admire and hugely, and have been lucky to make a lot of records with. He had just moved there. Wayne Horvitz, who was also from that New York downtown kind of art scene, had just moved there. You know, obviously the grunge thing was happening, but there was also overlap. Like like Wayne Horvitz had a band that was like mostly kind of jazz people, but he had Matt Cameron on drums, and I could just feel that there was this community of music happening, all kinds of different stuff, and everyone seemed psyched about what the other people were doing. You know, it wasn't like people just like, no, we do this kind and you do that kind, and which was the mentality that it felt like in Nashville that I needed to get away from.
Yeah,
that was like kind of music, and these are the rules in this music, you know. So that just pulled me in, and it was summertime, which is gorgeous in the Pacific Northwest. And most people that have moved here, it's because they visited in the summer and they thought it would be like that.
Yep, that's how they get you.
You know, it all lined up, and then when my trip ended, so I stayed there about a week and a half, sleeping in the parking lot of like a Best Western in my truck. And when, you know, I had a couple months for the rest of the trip to just be digesting everything, and I just knew I was going to move to Seattle. I just had to be there, and I was just going to show up there and just, you know, just start a life, see what happens. Like, I put some ads in the weekly things, like as a drummer. I kind of checked out like finding a cool band to join. I didn't really love any of the stuff I played with, you know, the bands that I got to play with. However, I did meet and make music with and become good friends with Jeff Mangum, who later went on to form Neutral Milk Hotel. We kind of bonded as, like, you know, self-identifying a little bit as as misfits or something.
Right.
And, you know, nobody understands us. Hey, you understand me. Let's scrap me. You know? So like that was cool. And I worked at a bar that was all musicians and artists that worked there. I mean, literally the owners were artists, and they made a point to only hire artists because they wanted to support the arts. That was kind of a way they could do it. Gradually started, you know, these people I was working with and their friends started asking me if I'd record them. You know, they heard I had a 4-track, which was pretty novel at the time. It was a reel to reel, so it was serious, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And yeah, people just come over and we just screw around. And eventually a couple of recordings sounded decent enough that when their friends heard it, they were like, whoa, you know, I got to call this guy. And it started happening just enough. And I was having a great time doing it that, you know, I got up the nerve to ask for a few bucks an hour or something, and went down from, you know, 6 days a week at the bar to 5, and then eventually to 4. 3, I mean, literally, and I went down to 1 for about a year and a half. I just was terrified to close the door, you know, because
Right.
I thought it's going to end. It'll end anytime. There's no way I'm going to like make a living doing fun music thing. Also, I was earning money at the bar that was allowing me to buy equipment. Like at that time, Mackie had announced the 8-bus console.
Yeah.
It wasn't available. Like I had the big pamphlet and I was just dreaming of it and saving up for it. And again, at the time, you couldn't get a console of that format, you know, without dropping big money.
Yeah.
And they were still probably what, I don't know, $2,500, $3,000.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I had one too. I had 1604s in Iraq, you know, a few of them, and like that was the way it was going to be. And then that 8-bus hit, and it was huge.
Right. It was huge. And that's, you know, that's how I started really learning signal flow, because it had just enough. It had the aux ends and the buses, you know, and the direct outs and the inserts. And I had a friend that knew enough about wiring that came over and showed me how to solder and like, you know, helped me figure out what kind of soldering we needed to do for each connection. And that was huge. I mean, yeah, that's kind of been my whole story. I mean, I'm self-taught and I've sort of tripped into things, not completely accidentally, because I've been fairly singularly focused on whatever musical things are interest me. And just, I think gradually like producing and engineering was just the amalgamation of all the things coming together, you know. I was interested in songwriting, but just didn't really feel like I was a songwriter. Like I know all the chords on a guitar that my dad knows, and he's made a living writing songs, but you know, it just didn't feel like it was my voice.
Right. So you just sort of by osmosis started making records. So because from looking at your credits, you've been a producer from the very beginning. Did you ever want to go work in a traditional studio thinking like, oh man, I'm going to go learn the ropes somewhere? Or did you just keep going and keep going and keep going and that's it?
Absolutely, I did. I tried so hard. I you know, I would dress up. I would put on a tie, and I would make like a nice letter on with like I made a nice letterhead and like.
Because there are a few good studios up there at that time, at least 4 or 5 major facility type studios.
Yep, and then I you know figured out what the ones below that were even, and I couldn't get arrested though. I could not get a call back. And I made it clear I was willing to scrub the toilets and just take out the garbage, and like, I got it. But no, like not a single call back. So I was like, all right, well, in the meantime, I'll just keep doing what I'm doing and we'll see what happens. And, you know, I was getting a little better and getting more equipment, and was able to, ended up making a couple of relationships like Bill Frisell. I got to know him, which I just kind of lucked into. Did a little project in a basement studio for him. We were doing the soundtrack to a Gary Larson Far Side movie. Gary Larson lives in Seattle. So, I mean, I was beside myself getting to work with Bill Frisell, but it turned out we just really connected. He really liked me, and you know, I don't think the recording probably blew anyone's mind, but it was fine. Got it done. And but Bill's the kind of guy, you know, as are most of my kind of frequent collaborators, that they're just like Oh yeah, we see eye to eye. Like I want to be in the, when I'm in a creative space in the zone, like I want someone like you in the room, you know, that I feel good with, that I trust, that I feel like when we talk about music, we're talking about kind of the same thing, because that's not always the case.
Yeah.
Again, going back, I guess, to those early days in Nashville, where I just, you know, felt like a fish out of water at times. But so that was great. Then Bill eventually, you know, fast forward a bit, he gave me a chance to like engineer some of his, you know, major label records at real studios in town. And I tried to talk him out of it at first. I mean, and I was like, are you sure? Like, I don't really know if I'll be able to know my way around all the things. And he's like, what? You're great. You'll be fine. You know, got in touch with the assistant in advance, and, you know, was very lucky. There were a couple, actually really one in particular, Floyd Reitzma.
I know Floyd really well. He's such a good guy.
Oh my God. He was so gracious. And, you know, he was sort of beyond me in terms of his career and his knowledge, but he just was like, man, anything you want to know, there's no dumb questions. And like, check this out. Oh man. And that was cool what you did there. Like, he just championed me when he could have just felt like threatened by me or annoyed that this, you know, that this young kid with so little experience was getting the gig. Yeah, major. I owe so much to Floyd.
Yeah, I did a string date. It was the first time I think I'd ever even been to Seattle, and came up to do a string date with Wendy and Lisa, and he was the engineer. I can't remember the name of the studio. It was kind of a weird little off the beaten path studio with low ceilings, but you could get 20 or 30 strings in there. Anyway.
I was going to Litho, because that's where he usually works.
Yeah, not Litho. It was before he was working at Litho, actually.
Okay.
But anyway, yeah, and he was exactly that. He was just all over everything, and so generous, and never trying to like take over, or, you know, because I mean, when you're working at a studio, really most of those people are trying to get gigs, and so any session that comes in, they're trying to show how good they are and hope they can leave with the gig, whatever. Absolutely none of that. Just really nice. So I'll email Floyd after this and tell him got a shout out, big one. Because then I went back up there to do vocals with Chris on the Audio Slave record, and it was just the three of us. And again, he was just the best ever. Because that's a difficult room to be in, but that guy could be in a room with anybody and make them feel supported and comfortable, and yeah, amazing.
That's half the gig, right? Feels like.
So
maybe more.
So that was the first time you were in like what we would consider a commercial studio, was a Frisell record.
I mean, yeah, as an engineer.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you know, I'd visited a few before that, but yeah. And you know what? It turned out great. It sounded great. And then we did another one. And also, you know, I don't want to be remiss in mentioning Wayne Horvitz, because he also around this time was bringing me into those studios and taking a chance on me. And I actually met Bill Frisell through Wayne. So Wayne was really pivotal for me too. But it was fascinating. I was like, well, okay, now I kind of understand how it works. And it's sort of like what I already knew. It's just on a bigger scale. Right. You know, it's at a certain, like, signal starts a place. Where do you want it to go? It goes to those places. Where do you want it to end, and how does it come back, and what do you want it to sound like? Which, you know, I sort of knew what EQs and compressors and reverbs and stuff did by then. I mean, was no master of it, but and it was a real learning thing for me to come out of there with some recordings I was happy with, and Bill was happy, and the label was happy, and I was like, damn, maybe I can do this.
And I suppose also, I mean, because you'd been managing sessions, like records, on almost no gear by yourself in suboptimal situations. I'm sure to be in a studio with an assistant must have just felt like a holiday in some ways.
Oh my God. Yeah, it did. It absolutely did. And additionally, because of Floyd's nature, but I was still scared shitless. Like, I was like, okay, well, now's when the thing happens that exposes me for just no idea what I'm doing. But so great too, because like those people, everyone I just mentioned, and you know, many others, but they didn't need me to like pretend that I was knew anything that I didn't, or they're like, just no, like just be yourself. Like they thought, like we've got a good ear. We like your ear, and we just sort of we like you. Like you're fine. Just
yeah, they already knew why they wanted you in the room.
Yeah. So that's great. I mean, yeah, for me, like just kind of finding my tribe early was huge, and eventually, I mean, Bill has enough of a reputation. And a few of the other little things I was doing at home were kind of making a small splash in the kind of local community that it was enough of a enough cred for other people to take a little chance on me. And or when someone would ask Bill who he recommended for a recording in Seattle, he would give them my name and stuff. So
that's brilliant.
That's how it all started.
Yeah. Well, so we can jump around a little bit because, I mean, with Bill, so you worked on a lot of his records, but then you actually made a record with him as a band, right?
Yeah.
And so, well, yeah, but still, I mean, and that's a bit of a jump. I mean, was that an idea that you had that you presented to him, or was this just something that kind of came up organically?
No, what it was so Matt Chamberlain, the drummer who we all know and admire, he was living in Seattle at the time. He and I were, I was just a huge fan of his. So, I mean, I was going to say he and I were kind of becoming friends, but mostly I was just like trying to be around him anytime I could and being nice to me. But he was a huge fan of Bill's, and he really wanted to play with Bill, and we would talk about that, and I was going like, yeah, man, you and Bill should do stuff. And he was like, man, I really want to do stuff with Bill. And then I'd see Bill and I'd be like, man, you should do something with Matt. And Bill, I really want to. And then Bill's manager, who also has produced the majority of Bill's records, Lee Townsend, he was there for one of those conversations, and I all it took was for Bill to say we should do it, because everyone else wanted to do it. But I didn't even know what that meant. Like, I was going to be okay just pressing buttons, and watching those two play together and getting to put a few microphones in front of Matt Chamberlain and just have my mind blown. But Bill's idea was like, well, what if we just go in the studio for a couple days and improvise, and Tucker, obviously you record it, and then you and Lee can take that stuff away for however long you need and like chop it up and find your favorite bits and like create forms from it, like, oh, this little thing might be a cool start of something, and then it goes to this bit, and maybe that bit returns later. Anyway, we got to do that with it, and then brought that back to Bill, and Bill would then, well, in a few cases it felt done, but often he would just kind of like write a line over that, like a line for a horn or for strings or something, or for the guitar, like a melody to play over it, just to kind of congeal it all together. And so it was very collaborative, and we all shared the songwriting credits 4 ways, and it was just a blast. I mean, Bill and Matt are some of the funnest people to record because their tones just immediately, I mean, I just literally don't think you could make a bad recording of them.
I could, but
Yeah. That's a YouTube channel that I'll start sometime soon. But you know what? That reminds me of a tie-in to sort of rewinding back a little. The first time I got to work with Matt, he was just like, hey man, I'll just come over. I'll just bring some drums, and I got these new drums and like these new cymbals I want to check out. Like, I'll come over. Like, you seem like a fine guy. You're really into recording, and I like playing drums. So he showed up. This was my first basement studio, like 6'3" ceilings, but furnace right next to the couch, which was like 6 from my little Mackie console. But as far as I was concerned, it was like it was a castle. And Matt came over, brought some stuff, and brought a Coles ribbon microphone, which I had never even heard of at the time. Apparently the Mix magazine articles I'd been reading hadn't mentioned that yet. Hey Bob, this is it was kind of hard to, obviously pre-internet, so I couldn't just, there weren't a million things to read about like what everyone's doing and what the cool things are to to try. But he brought the Coles ribbon microphone, and he said, just put that over the kit, like kind of right here, you know. So I put his hand somewhere over the kit, and I was like, huh, okay, I will. But like, you know, I got all this stuff. Like, I've got my what is it? Is it the D112? Is that the sort of the kind of modern kick mic?
Yeah.
And you know, I had 421s for the toms. I've finally been able to buy, and I was just all about like, no, dude, let me show you like the sounds I can get. Like, I'm starting to get pretty good drum sounds. But he just said, no, just put this thing up and check it out. And I was like, okay. I put it up, and I think by that point I had bought a Vintech, like the first Vintech mic pre, the Neve, you know, one of the early Neve knockoffs, whatever the cheapest one was, and an 1176. So I had a solid little chain, and that's what I ran it through. And just right away, I pulled the fader up, and I just could not believe it. It was fucking 100 times better than any drum sound I'd ever gotten. And I'd been spending, you know, days sometimes trying to get better, like on a drum sound, because I play drums too, and you know, but just like messing around. It was so obvious at that point. Not that I didn't already know it deep down, but that the Coles mic is incredible, but that it's all about the players and the tone that's coming off the instrument. I mean, that basement room was just stupid. The ceilings were so low, and the walls were right here, and it was square, and it just, but the drum sounded incredible.
Man, and that's informed every drum recording you've done since, basically, as far as I know, right?
I don't think I've recorded a drum kit without a Coles right there. Or if I'm feeling really crazy, I'll try the stereo pair, but then I often go back to one. But yeah, so absolutely. And not just drum recording, but just approach to recording, that if you're not getting the sound you want, you know, don't just keep EQing it or whatever. I mean, I'm not telling anyone else what to do, because I have no idea, like, how all you other like amazing people do what you do. But, you know, I'm just like, no, the singer either is like, they're singing too hard, or they're singing too close, or, you know, it's something about the tone at the source. And obviously the microphones are important, and I, you know, have a few to choose from and swap it out. But after a certain point, if you've tried a couple nice condensers, and you've tried a SM7 and a couple of things, and it's still not happening, like, all right, let's focus at the source. And that was the huge lesson from that day with Matt. And also the first time I recorded Bill Frisell, because I had been like obsessing over his records for years, and just thinking that these guys in the studio ran it through all these insane boxes that I'll never be able to have, the lexicon this and the lexicon that. And I just put my 421s on his little amp. Actually, no, he just used whatever amp was there. He didn't even,
You're that was joking.
Another. No, it was just like, yeah, you have amps, I'll just do that. And, you know, I mean, that just says it all right there, right? It's in the player, it's in the attitude of the player. They would never like blame the instrument or the microphone or something for not being the sound they want, because I mean, it is true. Like, if you've got a killer sound coming out of the amp, there are a lot of great tricks for recording and getting different sounds and bigger sounds and tougher sounds and all that. But like, if the amp sounds great, like, it's not going to be that hard to get a pretty damn solid sound quickly.
Right.
That's what those guys taught me.
So going back to another, band that you're in, the 4+1 ensemble. So again, you're not playing drums, right?
Right.
But you're in bands as an engineer, as a sound designer, as a sonic something, right?
Yeah. That was so cool, because it was, again, these guys just saying like, hey, you've got like a thing. You've got a cool way you hear things, and a cool way you treat sounds. And, you know, Wayne Horvitz, that was his band, or he was the leader of that band. And he just kind of created a role for me in a band. He was like, all right, I want a band that's kind of like, he called it sort of like a chamber group with plus me, which was I would have mics on all the instruments, all of which were acoustic instruments. Well, actually, occasionally Reggie Watts was in that band. He would often play like a synthesizer or something, but I had a vocal mic from him into my 1604 and into like a stack. I mean, again, at the time, now there's like a million cool things you can get, and they're all compact, or just do it all on your computer, I suppose. But I had this like 8-foot table with my mixer and just like 2 big stacks of rack gear, like Lexicon Jam Mans and the Digitech 8-second delays that you could like freeze and like change the pitch and you know, tape echoes and just weird reverbs and just whatever I could get my hands on that was fun to treat the sound with. And Wayne would write into the pieces often like these little moments that were kind of features for me, little solos. So I'm just taking the sounds I have all trapped in these boxes and bringing them up and trying to make it, you know, interesting kind of collage while the band is sort of vamping beneath it. That was totally Wayne's idea. And I was like, this is a blast, but like, I wouldn't have thought of that.
That's amazing.
Viola, piano, trombone, and Reggie Watts on keyboards. Yeah. And myself. Yeah. That was a blast. So that informed everything too, right? Because it's very related to my studio experiments, but now it's a live instrument, which was great. And I went on to like kind of start my own group for a while, Mount Analog, where I was doing that on stage with a drum kit next to me. So I'd kind of go back and forth or try to do both at the same time when I could.
It's amazing. I mean, it's such a different approach to this sort of standard recording approach, which is, I mean, obviously, like you talk to Al Schmidt and he's like, it's got to sound great in the room. So it's the same. It's just microphones. There's no EQ, no nothing, just capture what's there. But for a lot of people, it was about using the gear to capture. So you've got this amazing combination of just capture what's there in as natural way as possible and then fuck it up. Once you've got it, do anything you want to it. You're not capturing it so it can be pristine and you can prove you were in the room with it. There's nothing to do with that.
Right.
It's great. I mean, there was... Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I feel like I'm constantly trying to reconcile those two worlds. You know, like I want to be able to be Rudy Van Gelder, but then I also want to be Chad Blake like the same day. I just like admire those guys and so many different approaches. Yeah, I love destroying sounds and mangling sounds and like making a sound that we're really used to hearing, like trying to find ways to make it more interesting and all that. But you know, I try to be cautious never to just do it for the sake of doing it.
No, it's like an example today. I was going through the playlists you sent, which will be there for all the peeps to check out. And the My Morning Jacket song you picked was off Circuital, but Victory Dance, the first like 8 seconds of that song is like, what the hell is going on and where am I? And then it's relatively traditional sounding for the rest of the song. It's not like just a crazy noise collage, but the setup is so quick but so powerful that you are somewhere you don't know where that is, and you're just along for the ride, as opposed to, here's the song we wrote. And it's huge. It's a really big deal, I think, for setting that whole record up.
Yeah, I feel like my best collaborations with bands or songwriters, it's when people sort of recognize my love for those things, like the little accidental sounds that happen that are actually really cool that you could throw away because you weren't expecting it, so you just immediately write it off. But you know, most of my kind of deepest collaborations have been with people that also were kind of always searching for those things. Like those are the cool things. And I think that intro to Victory Dance was, you know, we did that record all to tape in a church, in a massive, it was basically like a gymnasium style room, but in a church, full rock band just set up in a circle in the front. So even just walking would just reverberate through the room for whatever, 10 seconds or something. It was a huge challenge to make that record, and in the best way. Like looking back, I wouldn't change a thing about that process. But yeah, those opening sounds, you know, I'm sure were some kind of oh, we're trying to get everybody ready. Is it who's ready? Or someone pedal was accidentally left on. Oh, they just stepped on it to turn it off. But no, they stepped on the wrong one and this sound happened. And also, since we weren't using a computer, it was a pain in the ass if you had a take that the band was pretty happy with and there was some little weird sound that you're like, man, what was that? Pretty quickly we were like, yeah, but this take. And then you kind of grow to love that sound, right?
Yeah.
But which is, I mean, it's a boring tale these days, I guess, but it's true. And I use Pro Tools every day now, but when it's so easy to take those things out or to change them, God, it takes so much discipline to just maybe let them be for a while.
Well, I think,
and now the art tools too. So if I don't take it out, one of them's probably going to be like, hey, what's that weird thing? Take that out.
Yeah. Well, I think this is the first time I'm trying to say this out loud in words, but there's this thing when you go in as a producer or a band member and you're like, okay, now we're going to record this song, and you do have an idea of what it is you're going to get. So the surprises when they're really outside the context of what you thought you were going to get can be really difficult to get used to, even harder, I think, for the band than it would be for the fans. So it's the recognizing that, and as you say, putting yourself in a position where you can't take it out. And then if it's really, 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 I mean, you could spot erase on tape. Like, there are a million things you can do, and we all did it making records before you could do it the easy way. But the discipline to live with it for as long as possible and see if it's actually going to become a feature is great. And it's something, I mean, it's really easy to do that now. You just don't do the things that are easy to do. But it's deciding beforehand, like making rules for yourself during a project.
Yeah. I pretty much always track basics to the tape machine. The sound is great, it's cool, but it's mostly just the psychologically, like, for the band to not fall into the like, oh, remember, it's all just a computer, and I think I played it right once and just scooted around and this and that. And I mean, I end up doing that plenty, but we do it less because of the mentality at the outset that, like, we're going to build this thing. It's either just, if we're going for just the whole live thing, it's just going to be that, or we're going to build the song on a performance, or at least like a handful of the band members were in the room at the same time, interacting, responding to each other. And I will also, I should add that usually I'll play back the tape when they come in for playback. And occasionally it sort of feels like a letdown, I'm like, what happened to the high end? It was a certain way, or the clarity, something I had going on the low end. Because I've been listening as it's going down, right? I'm not hearing the tape. So I love that process too, like just per song. It's like, this one loved the tape, this one didn't like the tape. But regardless, it's really good for the band to know that's going to tape. Plus, more often than not, people like it. They get excited. They come in the room like, whoa, tape, can we do that?
Yeah, and it smells good.
Yeah, right. Everyone wants to make a little video of the reels going around.
So I think we can now sort of just dive into the gigantic run you've had making records, because we got to the point where now you're making records, and it's huge. But I want to find out. I want to talk about R.E.M. only because I can't figure out, because like credit-wise, it seems like there's one EP. But there's more of a history there, right? I mean,
well, so R.E.M. They were so huge for me growing up. Like, I might not have even ended up fully pursuing music path if I hadn't found them, at 5th and 6th, 7th grade. It was the early, the first handful of records, just that weird, mossy, Southern Gothic sound. Just like, what planet did this come from? And I love the big hits and stuff too. Their whole trajectory was so cool to watch. But, the stuff that just sucked me in so deep was the earlier records. I got to record demos for them for that record, which I don't know if you have it in front of you. Was it Collapse into Now, or was it?
No, I think it was the next. I can't remember now. I don't have it right in front of me. Sorry.
Basically, they ended up using stuff from the demos for the record, which was how I got why I have that credit, but it was kind of sneaky because it was like, maybe these are just demos. But Peter Buck he's just all about, like, if he had his way, they would make records in a week. He's like, it's one of the first 3 times we play it. That's going to be what it should be. But there are other members of the band that feel differently and would rather be a, more meticulous, longer process. So, so that was just enormous for me to get called to be in the room. We can do that with them. But it's a legit credit because I did work on the record, but it's, it sometimes feels like generous that it's there, because it wasn't like I got to be in the studio with them from the first note to the last note on the record.
But the notes you recorded are on the record, so absolutely.
I don't know which ones, but apparently a bunch of them are on there.
And was that at your place, or where was that?
No, at the time, I didn't have a studio. When I first moved to Portland, I had a little basement that was mostly mixing, but I just thought I would try to use the studios around town. And that was done at Jackpot, Larry Crane's studio from Tape Op. It was just kind of what was available. And Peter was like, yeah, Peter's not fussy. He's just like so not into he's just like, yeah, whatever. Like, just go to a place that's available that you like. And we'll record some songs. We'll be done by 5 and we'll be at the steakhouse at 6:30. So yeah, that was done at Jackpot. And I kind of realized not long after that, like, I have all this equipment. By then I'd bought the API Legacy from Stuart Hallerman at Avast in Seattle when he sold it to get an even bigger one. And, I had great mics. I had great outboard. I had a baby coming. So I was like, I think it's time to just get a room, get a room out of the house and just go for it. I mean, I'd wanted to forever, but I got cold feet about like raising my overhead and all this thing.
Yeah, of course.
Well, it was working, having a basement studio. I could always go to other studios and I could use that. But yeah, it was time.
So were you a total fanboy the whole time with them? Had you met them before, or did this just sort of happen and they showed up and you had to explain that they were your heroes?
I knew Peter a bit, Peter Buck, like he lives here, and we had crossed paths a bit and had some really nice, friendly interactions. I'm trying to think if I had kind of roped him into anything at that point. I think we had already had him come in and play on the Decemberists record, The King is Dead. And also Scott McCoy, who lives here, who was kind of the 5th member of R.E.M., the sort of hidden guy, but he was with the band for, I think, 20 years or something. He lives here, and I'd made some records with him of his band, the -5, and just, we were neighbors and just super friendly. So I knew them. And then Bill Rieflin was the drummer at the time, who I knew from Seattle. And we got along great. And so, yeah, I'm trying to think I think that was when I first met Mike Mills. And well, I had met those guys as a young fanboy, which is kind of a great story, but for another time, because it would probably eat up too much time. But
we got all the time in the world, man. If it's a great story and you want to tell it, it's up to you.
All right, I'll tell it quickly. I'll try. So I was in Nashville. They were my all-time favorite band. It was the Life's Rich Pageant tour. I won tickets on the college radio station, 91 Rock at Vanderbilt, to go to the show at the Grand Ole Opry. I wasn't old enough to drive, so I had a couple friends that could drive that were fans, and gave them my extra tickets, and we went to the show. And I told them at some point, like during the show, I was like, I'm going to meet these guys tonight. Oh my God. No, you guys, I'm going to do it. I'm like, okay, whatever, Tucker. Because we had snuck in a couple like Miller Lite. So I was feeling crazy. And the lights went down for the encore, before the encore, pitch black. And I ran up to the stage, which was very accessible at the time. I mean, it was like a school auditorium style, right? Like there were no security guards. It was seated. I just climbed on the stage and went behind the huge curtain, just like got under it. And there was a huge stack of speakers, like, you know, the main, just massive. I mean, in my memory, it was 12 or 15 feet tall or something. And I was like, shit, what am I going to do? Like, I kind of felt like there's no turning back now because they're going to bring the lights up soon. I climbed up them, climbed over them, ended up, you know, side stage, the lights still down, like plenty of people around, but they were all kind of scurrying, getting ready for the encore. I saw a little crack of light, a doorway to the, you know, the halls behind, and went back there. I was like, shit, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? I didn't have a plan. And I saw a security guard, or he saw me, and he was like, hey kid, what are you doing? What are you doing? Where's your pass? You know? And I said, Peter Buck told me to wait for him till the show was over. Like, what I came up with. And I was like, okay, all right, well, here, he took me to the green room. So I'm sitting in the green room by myself for the encores of my all-time favorite band, like my heroes, and seeing some of their stuff sitting around, you know, they're like warm-up guitars and drum practice. And then the show ends. They were like heading back in the room, and I'm just terrified. I'm like, what am I doing? What am I gonna do? My favorite band is gonna like scream at me and like kick me out of here or something. And the security guard, when they came in, the security guard came in and said, hey Peter, this kid says that you told him to wait for him. Is that right? And Peter looked at me and he goes, oh yeah, he's good. He's cool. And
wow.
And I got to just hang out and shoot the shit with those guys, and they were just all sweet as could be. And as you can imagine, Peter was thrilled when we met many years later, and I got to tell him that story because, you know, it could have been the night that maybe he wasn't feeling it, and he, you know, wasn't as nice. But
man, that's incredible.
Yeah. He could just see, like, I wasn't threatening. I was 14 or 15, and I just probably had just the fanboy glow. Yeah, so that's
That's awesome. That's awesome. So let's work backwards a little bit, because there's a record early on that I want to hear a little bit about, and it might be one of these like, well, I don't know, I worked on that for an hour kind of thing. But Julian Priester, of all people.
Oh, yeah. So Julian, legendary trombone player.
Yeah.
He was in the one ensemble, where I was the electronicist, was what they ended up.
Electronicist. That's awesome.
They needed a name. And yeah, Julian and I hit it off, and he was starting to plan a record with Sam Rivers, just legendary saxophone player, played with Miles, and just, I mean, I won't even start because everyone has Google if they need it. But and Julian was like, yeah, I want to do a record of duets with Sam, but you know, we don't want it to just be like just the two of us. Like, we want to have a little angle. Like, would you be into doing your thing? Of course I would. So, I mean, that's basically what happened. Was we flew to New York. There was this little label that was doing these quick jazz records called Postcards. And I think we had one day in the studio. The producer guy was also the owner of the label. And I'm fine saying that, like, I think he wishes I wasn't there. He was like, I've got my guys. What the fuck is this kid doing here? Like, with this little, what is this crap on it? He's unpacking on us, you know, these weird little loopers and stuff. Jesus, I got two of the all-time great players here in the room. I mean, I was already intimidated because I was really young, and these guys are total legends, and just the basic insecurities one can have. I mean, I didn't even know what my instrument was or what was expected of me or how it was going to go, because previously there had been things sort of written in, and there was a lot of room for improvisation, but there was also, it was like, all right, ring modulator on the piano to start this one.
Right.
Those kind of things, you know, sort of get the flow going. So yeah, we made a record, and I've heard the record, you know, more recently. I don't think I was bringing anything that amazing to the table. I do remember feeling like my favorite things that we did, the producer guy was just like, no, just lose that. Because I think they were the things where it felt like the concept of me with the guys was most integrated and made sense. And I really think he was just wishing so bad I wasn't there that he tried to find the stuff where I played the smallest part.
Right.
Which I get, but I think it should either be just like either commit to the concept or just like send me home,
Right.
But this sort of thing, I don't think anyone really wins from that. But the experience was amazing. And then we did some shows, like we got brought around the country to different jazz festivals, kind of on the heels of that album.
Well, unless I'm getting it confused with another label, that was a pretty experimental label? Wasn't that the label that had Jamaldeen Chikuma and a couple of like real avant-garde New York jazz people on there?
Yeah, it did. They had a lot of stuff. I mean, I think the guy was like, musicians always need money, right? So I think if he's like, hey, I've got, you guys come into the studio for a day, I'll give you each $5,000 or whatever. I don't know what the arrangement was.
Right.
That's hard to turn down in 1994 when you're like an experimental jazz bass player or whatever.
Yeah,
so,
exactly. But I guess he was okay with like the musical experimentation, not the electronic experimentation. Because Jamaldeen's record was out there, but it wasn't processed.
Right. Yeah, maybe just because it wasn't his idea, or he hadn't heard it in advance, or maybe he just had, when he thought of the idea of that record, he just had something so specific in his mind he couldn't let go of, and that's normal. But
so did you see that as sort of a path you might take, or it was like, oh, that's cool, I've done it with a couple people now, but I'm making records? Did you decide at some point that you were going to be a record producer as opposed to the sort of sound collaborator, more of a performer?
I was really just psyched to ride this wave of like, I'm just into all these different things, all different kinds of music, just sound, all the things you can do with sound. Like I love a good country song. I like a good noise band. I like, classical music. I love jazz. I like some metal. Just whatever. So I was just like, I'm just kind of waking up each day and I'm getting to do something that relates to what I'm psyched about. And I think trying to not ask too many questions about like, well, where exactly does this all lead?
Right. So you didn't even see them as different things. It was just stuff you did.
Yeah. It was stuff that opportunities that were created by me doing what I most liked to do. Like people seeing the thing that was most me. Like they saw it better than me, in many cases. I was like, why do you want me to do this? Or, like, Bill, Frisell, why do you want me to record this? Like you could get anybody to do this. But there was just a lesson in there that like, I guess like there's some little thing that's what I do that, I need to appreciate and learn.
Yeah. Look, we're all, some to a greater extent than others, but it's the imposter syndrome thing. But it's, I think, realizing that musicians need someone to listen to them while they're recording. And that's a huge thing. So much more important than anything else you do is the listening and the feedback. And that's so individual. It doesn't matter what sort of experience you've got,
Right. And being able, possible to kind of anticipate the next move before they have to say it, that can be huge.
Yeah, sharing the vision.
Bill's so prolific. Like he makes several records a year. He makes them quickly. He wants to walk in and start playing. He's going to play the song 2 or 3 times and it's done, and you better have it. He's not going to like lord over you, like you better have it, but like you just know. You don't need him to say it. So yeah, it's just like, I'm like, let's just create a path where all Bill has to think about is making music. And in his case, it was different for every project, right?
Yeah. Well, so sticking with the New York avant-garde thing just for a second, John Zorn.
Right. Well, that was just like the association with Bill and Wayne and a few other Seattle people too. Avon Kang, the viola player who was in the 4+1 ensemble. He was making records for Zorn's label, and it basically when people like that would come through Portland, Seattle at the time, for any reason to record, often I would get the call because I was sort of like now affiliated with these guys. So that was, and that's how kind of everything happens, I guess, right? Some version of that, some
Yeah.
relationship that you have that sort of
Yeah.
leads to the next.
Absolutely. All right. So what would you say was kind of the first record you made as a producer that was like, okay, I've now just produced a record and now you're on this trajectory? Because I mean, once it starts rolling, it's kind of ridiculous. It's basically every single cool thing that happened from then on. But like, where did you have a project that you felt after it was done, like, oh, holy shit, now that was that? Or was it just continued to be organic all the way through?
Oh man, I feel like there are a million little versions of it. You know what I mean? They're all different. There was kind of a few singer-songwritery, like interesting singer-songwritery people in Seattle. I feel like were kind of some of my early opportunities to really produce, because I don't know, there was just a little more room in that. If somebody comes and is like, I have this song idea, and they're like, how does that become a thing that people will listen to at home and want to hear, like, I know this one guy that does this thing. I know this woman that plays this other thing. And here's what I think we should do. We should keep this super sparse and we should record it in this kind of space. A lot of the stuff up till then is kind of like, a person comes in and they just want you. They're like, all right, I'm just going to do my thing real quick and you record it.
Right.
I'll be out of here. Jessie Sykes is a songwriter that I made her first couple records, and those turned out really, really cool. And I mean, she has a vibe and a vision, and she also really welcomed and embraced what I had to offer. And like those were some records that made, kind of a big deal in Seattle, but just made a little splash outside of there, and people just loved it for the sound too. Like it was a lot of remarking about the sound, not in lieu of the songs and the music. I think hopefully in addition, I really believe so in that case. But that comes to mind. I'm remembering now too, part of it was me learning to say like, hey, look, early on, let's not worry about the money, or like, okay, you have that. That's how much money you have. Normally that would be whatever, 3 or 4 or 5 days, or whatever it was. But I just said, look, I don't want time to be compromising the record. So, just pay me that much, but we're going to probably use more time than that. And we're going to keep doing this until we're really psyched. And that was really big for me, because for a while I was feeling like, all right, these are, considering what I had to work with, that was decent.
Right.
And I just tired of having that excuse of like, man, I wish we didn't have to do it so fast. I mean, plenty of times working really fast works out great. And I've come to appreciate that more and more and more as I've had more experience. And also just working with people that embrace that way of working. But that was important for me to kind of show like what we can do if care was taken. And then people would come to me because they loved that record, like Jessie's record or whatever it was. And I could say, okay, but check it out. Like, here's part of why that has all those cool dimensions, because, we recorded the basic song pretty quickly, but like those other little things that are making it really special. Like we spent some time trying things, and we sometimes we spent like an afternoon getting a pedal steel on a song, because it was on tape and we wanted to feel like each phrase counted, and so I'd keep that phrase and then punch in this little spot right here. You need to start there, but you need to be out by here, and everyone's got to kind of get attuned to that for it to work.
Yeah, it's amazing how a single overdub can become a real adventure and take up just a gigantic amount of time and energy, and yeah,
which can be a drag if you don't feel like we're all on the same page with like what we're going for, and we know it when we hear it, and we're gonna get it. If you're doing that and you feel like you already had it like 5 takes ago or 15 takes ago, like that's such a bummer. But
yeah, and especially on tape when you've erased it. So yeah.
I still every once in a while have people ask, and I love it so much. Like I guess they don't have, if they don't have experience recording the Pro Tools, like, so I'd like to try that again, but if I do that, is there any way we can keep the one I already did?
I love that you still have people asking you that instead of the other way around.
Right. I mean, it doesn't happen a lot, but it does sometimes still happen. And I love that. I love that sort of wide-eyed view of this process, and not just the kind of jaded, like, whatever, like computers, we can do anything. So don't worry too much about nailing it,
Right. Amazing. So another early one was Petra Hayden, and this is all just sort of in that. I mean, obviously, daughter of Charlie Hayden. So, was any of that a connection for that, or was this completely come from Petra?
That was through Bill Frisell again. Yeah, and yeah, she is. She's a total genius. Just kind of a wild card.
Yeah, all his daughter and him, obviously too, but the whole family. Geniuses.
The Hayden triplets. Yeah.
It's kind of scary.
Yeah, that was one too where I didn't realize how brilliant she was until kind of later after the fact. I mean, I knew she was great at the time, but she sort of just does it in such a kind of a loose way that I'm like, yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure. Are we doing a thing? Is this real? Like, is she into it? Then I just realized, no, that's just kind of how she is. She might, like, there was a day where, in the middle of the day, she was like, can I just take a nap for a while? I'm like, okay, all right. Like, whatever keeps you in your zone.
All right, well, look, let's talk about one other non-record related thing, and then I'm going to start just naming artists, like I haven't already, but the Microsoft Vista thing. So... How'd that one come about, and what was it like? Because I mean, those are some super high pressure, tweaky, crazy gigs with 1 million people overseeing it, and this does not sound anything like anything you've described up until this point.
No, right. So yeah, here again, just kind of going about my business, kind of screwing around with things that interest me, and I got that call one day. So there was a guy in Seattle who had the job at Microsoft that was basically like, all right, you're going to oversee the startup sound for the next operating system. And he loved my Project Mount Analog, which was my experimental kind of instrumental thing. It was just like me and my 1/2-inch 8-track Otari at the time, just whatever, like a few little devices I had, and like patching the output of the reverb back into the input of the reverb, and whatever, like having friends come over and just having fun. He really loved that. And he also, so he asked me and Robert Fripp if there was anyone else I didn't learn about it. It was also like, shrouded in mystery. You're like,
of course,
be 1 million people. Actually, no, that's not true. I remember in the beginning he said there were a lot of people, but after that first round, I couldn't believe that I got selected, but it was Robert Fripp and I, and also Pat Mastellato, I think is how you say his last name.
Yeah.
Who played with King Crimson.
Yeah.
Drumming. So this guy obviously was a big King Crimson fan, and I think maybe he was like, well, let's just sort of see what this local kid is going to do. And I learned through that Brian Eno had done the startup sound for the previous operating system, and I was like, holy shit, well, I got it. But yeah, it just became comical by the end. It was kind of fun in the beginning. Like, I had a buddy of mine, Steve Moore, over, who was sort of a keyboard guy, and we would just screw around, and the parameters had to be 3 seconds from start to finish, like including decay.
Yep,
right?
No ring out, nothing.
Over in 3 seconds. So they kind of wanted it to be a composition. They called it a composition. So there had to be like a start. There had to be an arc to it. It somehow had to wrap up 3 seconds. It was a blast screwing with that. Like, I mean, it was hilarious at times, because like how many, I mean, basically it's going to end up being some version of like, or like, there's only so many different things that can happen in 3 seconds. But, So we had some fairly cool things early on that kind of got us going to the next round. But sort of in the end, the last stages were, okay, we want you to come to the Microsoft building, one of many, of course, and Microsoft Studios, and work on the sound there with our new round of feedback, which was just kind of hilarious because it was basically like a stereo DI, right? Like, didn't need that.
Yeah.
Whatever studio had that my basement studio didn't have was purely cosmetic at that point. But it was a chance for them all to, kind of justify their jobs. So Steve and I would screw around for a few hours, and then they would come in. There would be, I think there was 14 of them. They would all just stand in the back, and they would be like, all right, we'll play us what you got. So we were like, all right, well, here's a few. And, they're taking notes. And I mean, literally, it was the things people joke about, but like, there was one of the early ones that was kind of aqua. And that I thought really worked, because what we want to say with this new operating system is it's fresh. It's somewhere you want to be. It makes you feel good. It makes you excited about this operating system that you're opening up, and just overthinking these things like crazy. And also, it became apparent the further on it went that they were basically just trying to create the Mac operating system that was so successful at the time. I mean, from the look, everything. I mean, nobody could say it, but they were clearly going for that. So by the time it was all done, I did not recognize anything. I've heard the sound. I'm like, I just never heard it in my. But apparently Robert Fripp and I are credited for having co-made it together. We were never in the room together, but I guess we both chose the same note, or like dipping over 3 seconds of a note, or rising, or whatever it was. It was a cool experience. I mean, it also turned out, not to sound crass, but like, it turned out to not pay well at all. And part of that was like a learning lesson for me, because I never asked about the money, right? I was like, I'm going to do this. And then in the back of my mind, I'm like, how awesome. This is going to probably pay really well. I did find somewhere on the internet that Brian Eno had made $1 million for that other startup sound. I wasn't expecting that, but I was like, maybe something different. But, I think they recognized that, A, I wasn't asking about the money. I was young and not like a name and all those things. So it was fine. I mean, I got a few $1,000s, but it ended up being like, it was a lot of days of, a lot. I lost count. And, I'm glad I did it. I think I'd hoped that it might lead to something cool and more interesting. And it never did. No one ever called me and be like, hey man, you're the what going for?
But you got to work with Robert Fripp, so that's pretty damn cool.
Yeah, and we were in the studio next to him, but guess they didn't want us to.
So you didn't hang out? Other.
No, we didn't. We didn't. I have a feeling that the guy that was sort of overseeing it, who was such a huge Fripp fan, was probably monopolizing any spare Fripp time that was available, as he should.
Well, yeah. I mean, if you can, I suppose.
I mean, if you work for Microsoft and somehow you get to use that as an excuse to hire your musical hero and bring him in, yeah.
Why not?
That's what.
Yeah, exactly. And I have to say that Robert Fripp is making some of the best lockdown videos I've seen. Have you seen these? God. Oh my God.
Unbelievable. They really are just brilliant.
Yeah.
And so fun, but also substantial.
Yes.
Like there's something to it.
Yeah.
I would love to know how they came about that, because his wife's always in it, right? Like, he's in the front with the guitar, and then she's kind of in the background, maybe doing some sort of dance, some kind of David Byrne moves or something. Like,
well, I think the thing is, in the States, you don't realize that she's as big or bigger a celebrity than he is.
I didn't know that.
Big time.
Maybe most we do. Okay.
Yeah, there's an early video where they're doing like a song off, and she's singing her one of her big hits, and then he plays a bit of, and they're back and forth. But the one where she's tap dancing to, I think, Fractured or something like that is just absolutely genius. Yeah, but she's a big deal over here. So.
Yeah. And what's her name?
Oh, it flew out of my head. I knew you were going to ask.
Well,
Debbie would know, but she had to go like tend to the potatoes or something. So
I wish there were
we'll look at, maybe Mark will text me.
Okay. All right.
I'll have my staff look it up while we talk about the Decemberists. Let's talk about them, because they were a little bit under the radar and then got gigantic, but they're sort of early in your producing bands career. So obviously sort of a big deal, probably for both of you, really.
That was a bit that I definitely saw that as a big break, like one of like a handful of like, that was just flat out just felt like a big break. It was their first major label record. I mean, I was making records that some people liked, in my little sphere, but like it wasn't taking the world by storm or anything. But they just really loved a few of those. So Chris Walla from Cab For Cutie had produced the previous record, and then for the first one I worked on, which was called The Crane Wife, Chris wanted us to co-produce it, because he also was like, we were sort of mutual admirers of each other. And I think we both were just interested in seeing other ways of working, and just seeing what would happen if he put his peanut butter in my chocolate, as it were.
So to speak.
That maybe didn't fly out just the way I did. But, so that was really cool. I mean, co-producing has its challenges. It was very challenging in a lot of ways, I think, probably for both of us. But and we were living together at the time. I mean, I was visiting Portland, staying with him. I mean, we got along great. It was never like tensions or anything, but he had such a style, and I had apparently, I didn't realize how much of a style I had until I was in the room sharing the role with someone else with such a different style. But it was cool. Also, he kind of, we each would recognize when it was like, oh man, no, you run with this. You got it. You got a thing. So that was really cool. And then I got to make a bunch of records with them afterwards, just producing solo, myself. And at first, it was also tricky because he had made a record with them, so they kind of had a rapport. So I kind of wanted to observe for a minute, before I just showed up and started having opinions about everything. But it wasn't long before I had opinions about everything.
Which is good. But so that was the first time you'd collaborated with anyone other than the musicians in the band? In a band? The first time you'd co-produced?
Definitely. One of the only, still to this day. I mean, right. I'm not counting that often the artist would be credited as co-producing, but there's probably another example or two where credits ended up being shared, but it's definitely the only time that it was really like from the outset, that was the plan. And then part of it also was that Death Cab was really busy at the time, and Chris was playing in them and also producing them. But so having me there also allowed him to be free to just be gone whenever he needed to be gone, and the band not feel like they were getting deserted.
Right.
Which ended up for me, because I did end up a lot of time just me and the band, and then I think we developed a rapport that bled into many records after that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and then you ended up working with Death Cab as well, right?
Yeah.
So was that again with Chris co-producing, or was that post?
That was just mixing.
Oh, just mixing. Okay.
Yeah, that was one of those things where they were like in Australia or something, and they realized that they needed to turn their album in by a certain date, and it wasn't going to work out with the way the tour was getting routed, and so they just reached out to me and asked if I'd do it.
Great.
That was a blast. Chris had always said, he was like, I want you to produce a Death Cab record someday, but then he went and quit the band.
Yeah.
And
well, I had a really interesting conversation 2 weeks ago with Rich Costi, who obviously has been working with him now.
That's the one that I've seen, and that interview was amazing. He's
Yeah, he's incredible. But the whole thing about Chris, like, sort of co-producing ish, but then sliding off to not be producing as much and not even telling Rich that he wasn't in the band anymore. Like, obviously that story was,
but
yeah.
I would love, because
Yeah.
I know that story he exited was like somewhere in the making of that first record with Rich, right?
Yeah, yeah, and it was. I mean, it's like the 2 hour mark or somewhere in the middle of that thing with Rich, but it was basically that Chris and the band knew what the situation was, and so they brought Rich in, but Rich didn't know what the situation was. I think part of him was wondering, like, well, okay, Chris has always done this. So Chris took himself off to a different studio, and he's practically like remixing the record while Rich is producing the record, and they're going back and forth, but never actually working at the same time. And Chris was making out like, wanted to play in the band, just wanted to be a band member, when in fact it was that he was gone. Like, as soon as they finished making the record, like, that was it. But it was a really, like, these situations happen a lot where people are on their way in or on the way out and stuff's weird, but I've never seen one managed or heard of one managed like adults that much, but still have it be just so weird, that everybody sort of knew, but don't tell Rich because he might think it's weird. And it worked out great, and Rich has worked with them again, so obviously, it worked out, but that could have been such an absolute mess. And I guess in a way it's a testament to Chris that no matter what sort of problems he was having that was making him not want to be doing that anymore, he still was loyal to the project and the band and his place in it.
And that's kind of, looking back on that, that's sort of a nice little handoff of the baton, rather than them having always made records with Chris producing, and then just one day they start a new record, Chris is gone, and it's some new guy they've never worked with. There was, Chris he was there to create probably somewhat of a familiar environment and process for the band while the new elements were working.
Yeah, and I'm sure a little bit of a security blanket for them as well, because I mean they'd never made a record without him,
Yeah.
So that's got to be weird.
Yeah, but it seemed to work out for him.
Yeah. It's gone all right. So, I mean, there's so much, but I want to hear a little bit about Modest Mouse, actually, because when we very first met, you were sort of kind of working on a record that may or may not have been continuing and whatever, but obviously there's a lot of history with you, and I'd love to just hear a bit, because it's obviously difficult making those records, but they're great, and yeah.
Right, so the history with me and Modest Mouse is... so there was a label in Seattle in the 90s. Did it go into the 2000s? I can't say for sure when it kind of defunct, but this guy named Chris Taquino had an imprint on Sub Pop called Up Records. And they put out like the early Built to Spill records, and Modest Mouse, also a bunch of kind of bands with that with that sound at the time. Or some variety of that sound. Chris and I knew each other a little bit from getting pizza slices at the same place downtown, and I don't know how we ended up striking up a conversation, but anyway, he was like, "Oh, you're interested in recording stuff." So he got my number, and one day he called and just said, "Hey, there's this young band that I want to put out a 7-inch for. Would you be up for recording?" And I was like, yeah, I mean, at the time too, I just didn't ask any questions. I was like, yes, before you even tell me what it was, right?
Yeah.
No, I mean, nobody knew Modest Mouse. I mean, I think they had one 7-inch out on K Records at the time. That was it. So I mean, not nobody, but you know what I mean. Like they weren't selling out the club or anything. So they showed up. Well, no, first Chris was like, I would like you and Isaac, who's like the front guy of the band, to just have a phone conversation and work out the details, when and where and what and stuff. So I called Isaac, and he was like, man, you gotta excuse me, like if I sound weird, but like I just lit off one of these bug bombs in my room, and it's just like filling up the room, and it's just like insane chemicals and stuff. And I was like, fun is, but I was like, man, you sounds like you should get out of there. And he was like, oh, no. Like, I mean, I did it on purpose. Like, all right. Here we go. So I ended up recording a few songs in my basement to my 1/2-inch 8-track. And that ended up never coming out. There was some confusion. Apparently, they had told K Records they were going to make them a 7-inch. They had told Sub Pop they were making them a 7-inch. They had told Up Records they were making them a 7-inch. And there was all this confusion, like all the different labels claiming that that was theirs. And the way they solved it was just scrap it. And they redid it in Olympia, where they were living at the time, I think. Were they living there? They were spending a lot of time there. So I got to make that early Modest Mouse stuff with them, but it didn't come out. And I've gone back and heard it, and it's fine, but it's, I was definitely still learning. And then, many years later, rewind, what was that? When we were hanging out in Arizona, like 5, 6?
I think it's more than that ago. I think it's probably, no, you're right. 6 or 7, I'd say. Yeah.
So they had started their record at the time with Brian Deck, who they'd made records with in the past. Or was it John McIntyre? I think they both those guys had a hand in it at one point. When I came in, it was just like the tale was crazy. Like, well, we started with this guy, and then we scrapped it, and went to this guy, and da da da. Welcome. Like,
it's like they just set off a bug bomb in the control room.
I love the band. And I knew it was going to be like, I'd known Isaac long enough, and I knew it was going to probably not be just the most straight ahead session ever, but I do love the band, and was excited to do it, and excited to kind of reunite with them in this day and age. Like, they'd gone on to have all this success. I'd figured out a little more what I was doing. We both found ourselves living in Portland. So I worked on that record it's called Strangers to Ourselves. It was in Isaac's studio that he was kind of just setting up at the time. So it was, a lot of it was like, where should we put drums? Where should we put amps? Maybe we should reorient the console this way. And, it was kind of like I was helping get a studio dialed in while we were also working on the record. It was a convoluted process of working on existing tracks, but in many cases we ended up basically one by one replacing everything, but never just saying like, let's just start from scratch,
right.
Which probably would, or maybe might have even been a better result. Who knows? But but then by the time it came to mixing, so the tracking ended up taking like 3 times as long as guessed as we thought it would. And then I had other commitments and wasn't available for mixing it. I remember talking to you that I thought it would be great to have you mix it, but it wasn't entirely just my decision. So actually it ended up being this guy, Jeremy Scherer, who lived so Isaac had like a bunch of people that just lived at this little compound where the studio was. And they were just they just lived there. They would, usually around like 1 or 2 o'clock, like people just start wandering out into the studio, like, hey, what's going on? And Jeremy ended up mixing it. I think, he was just living there, and it probably just made sense. He was like, let me take a crack at it. And so, that's how it goes sometimes.
That bug bomb story may be my favorite thing I've ever heard. Like, that's like, no, I did it on purpose. Okay.
Yeah.
You kind of know. I mean, and that set up every single thing you said since then. Right.
When there are, obviously it's not prudent to tell all stories, but I feel like, Isaac's really good at keeping you guessing too. Like, half the time think they're made up, and he's just kind of trying to keep you off balance.
Yeah.
Sometimes you know, and sometimes you don't. You know, when he's just kind of trying to mess with you. So, but that's part of the gift.
Yeah.
In that.
So look, we got it, because if we don't talk about her now, then we might not, and then you're going to be in huge trouble. So your wife, who is also an amazing artist, you've made a ton of records with her. I've got one question about it, and then I'd love to hear sort of your take on making records with her and how it's different from everything else. But you play drums on all those records. You don't play drums on a whole lot of people's records. It's like you're not the producer who also plays drums. But
right.
You play drums on every single one of those records, as far as I could tell. So I'd just love to hear that as being part of, you know, your process of making those records and why they're so different from the other records you make. Because they don't sound different. It's not like, oh, I'm doing this other thing now. They still sound like the kind of records you make.
Yeah, it goes back to like around that time of the Jesse Sykes record. Laura Veers, I don't know if you already named her, but
I didn't, and I should have. And by the way, Robert Fripp's wife is named Toya Wilcox.
That's right. Okay.
Just popped in. But anyway, let's talk about Laura Veers.
Okay. So she had heard the Jesse Sykes record and I think something else, and kind of knew some of those people. They were playing some of the same shows and open mics and stuff. And her friends heard that she was going to record, and they were like, oh, you should talk to Tucker. So she dropped a cassette by of her demos, and she had never recorded before. Had only played a couple shows by herself. And I just thought they were so charming. I thought it was really cool and original, and just had this, there's kind of this, just like this naivety to it that was really badass. Like she's never been one to listen to a ton of music, which is actually really cool. So she doesn't really know what's cool and what's not, and she doesn't really end up just like trying to do the such and such thing because she doesn't necessarily know that thing. Anyway, she was just like, all right, I'm gonna play my songs on the acoustic guitar and like let me know what you think we should do. And at that point I was fired up. I could really hear like how we could treat all these songs. And she trusted me to like call in some people for a few things. And there was a song that she had the idea that she wanted drums on. She was like, you should play drums. Because I don't ever volunteer myself. I've never been like, you know who should play drums on this? And I've declined it a lot, right? But so it was just here we are. It's like a super small budget thing in my crappy little basement. I'll just put some drums on it. That ended up being a record that people really liked. And so we got to make another one. And we just kind of kept the pieces that were working, trying to make a new record, a fresh record each time, but not just reinventing things that already were great. And, I knew that she was into my drumming approach. So I didn't really have to worry about like, well, what if I play on this and it turns out I'm not the right guy and that's going to be weird. So that was erased. And then, and then her career kind of took off and ended up, getting on None Such records. And we got got better budgets over time to work with and spend a little more time making records. And eventually, eventually fell in love, got married, had kids. So, but I don't know how many records. I think we made 10 records together.
Yeah, amazing. And do you schedule those the way you would any other project, or?
Yeah. Because we already had that pattern, beforehand when it was just professional relationship. And also she's just very organized and very kind of schedule oriented. It was just natural. And also I was, I've been pretty busy. So she was like, well, we're going to earmark some time for me. Like, we're going to do this. So like these dates now, these are my dates. And which is great, right? Because if you're just like, oh, we'll just do it kind of whenever happens. Well, there was no whenever happens at that time.
Yeah.
I was busy, and eventually we had kids in the picture, not right in the beginning, but so yeah, we would schedule it like any other record, and for the most part, like continue to budget it like any other record, because again, there was just like, here's how we've always done it. This has always worked. We pretty much stuck to that. I mean, there was one point like building my studio where basically like I ran out of money. Surprise, the studio building went over budget, and she was just like, well, I'll just loan you some money that will just be an advance on my record. You know, that was convenient, that kind of thing. But otherwise, we kept it pretty traditional arrangement.
Right.
I mean, let's just say like if we ended up needing a little more time and the money had run out, like I wasn't going to just be like, oh, I'm sorry. You know?
But that's how you've been since the very beginning. If it's not done and you can possibly spend the more time, you will anyway. So
whole point, right? Like the reason I'm doing this, and I probably yourself and most of us, is like we want to make really cool records. It's like that comes before anything else. So if I don't think like the record's great and I think a little more time is going to make it great, you know, there's a conversation. Sometimes they can, you know, there's a little more money that can be had in the budget because everyone really sees what that's going to do. And sometimes there isn't, or they're not even sure why. And I just have to say, okay, well, just trust me that it's me taking the risk, but let's spend another week doing X and Y.
Right.
At the end of the day, I mean, yes, it's my livelihood. I make a living, my overhead's high, like all that stuff. I definitely need to be paid, but you know, what makes me psyched at the end of the day is just feeling like we did good work, not just like I collected a paycheck. So
yeah, there are easier ways to collect a paycheck. So
there are ways with more predictable schedules and
yeah.
What?
So I mean, there's so much more to talk about, but we're also over 2 hours already. So, but let's lump these next two things together. So, Nico Case, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
but then also you did a collaboration between Laura, Nico, and Katie Lang, and so we can tie all that kind of together, like how that came about, how Katie got brought in, or what it was for, too.
Yeah, there was that was wild. It was like I was working with Nico on her record, one of her records, and she ended up KD was living here at the time. The Weekly had somehow knew Nico was in town and had this idea of like Nico and Katie get together and have a conversation, and there'll be like an article. So I dropped Nico off at that meeting. It was like in the middle of one of our recording or mixing days. They kind of became pals, and they had a real mutual admiration thing going on. Laura played a benefit show that Katie also played, and they kind of hit it off, and it turned out Katie was a big admirer of Laura's, and for sure vice versa. And then I got to just sort of know Katie through those things happening, and then Katie called me when she needed to do demos and stuff, so she would come in, and we struck up a friendship and really connected. And Katie had I think she was probably the first one to say it, because I think everyone else felt like if they said it, like there's no way Katie would want to do this. But Katie was like, she was trying to figure out what her next move was in her career. And I think, you know, she'd made a lot of records, and it gets harder and harder to feel like, how do I get into some new territory? And
she's always trying to reinvent herself big time.
Right that way. And so I think she just saw how different Nico's artistry was from her own, and same with Laura's. And Laura's is not like Nico's, and everyone really admires each other, and like we all get along great. And you know, then there's me, like, who has this studio, and she's comfortable with me, and actually she could walk to my studio. So it just, the idea was born, and we all said yes immediately. And the biggest challenge was really, I think, the songwriting process. which I wasn't really there for, but I was, you know, in the house married to one of the songwriters. I know that that was really challenging because they all have such distinct individual voices. Like Katie's phrasing is nothing like the phrasing that Laura or Nico are comfortable with. So it was really tricky, like figuring out who was going to sing what. And if Katie's going to sing it, well, she's going to want to change the phrasing, maybe take some words out because she likes to draw fewer words out longer. And, you know, Nico and Laura might like kind of rolling phrases that are more percussive. So that was wild. And there were some times where it felt like that the train might just go off the rails and the thing wasn't going to happen. But it did. It just kind of narrowly did. But once we all got in the studio together and the tracks were, I mean, the songs were written, they had entrusted me to pick the players. We had Glenn Kochi from Wilco played drums, and my old friend Tim Young played guitar, who I don't know if you ever encountered him in LA, but he's down there. And Sebastian Steinberg played bass, and Rob Berger played keyboards. It just, you know, everyone was psyched, and we did a pretty live off the floor kind of approach. There were certainly overdubs later, vocals and some strings and, you know, a few whatnots, but a pretty live approach to that. That was a thrill. I was very intimidated the first few times working with Katie because, I mean, she's a big personality. She is a badass. Like, I mean, she just brings it. You turn the mic on. Okay, it's like that, you know? And she, you know, she doesn't mince words either. Like, she'll just say exactly what she's thinking in as few words as possible and doesn't couch it in niceties. And not because she's being mean or bitchy or anything. It's just like, hey, let's get some work done, you know? And I'm probably, I was raised like to just praise like criticism or feedback maybe in a nicer, you know, a softer delivery. So that was an adjustment for me, but it was good. It was really good for me. I learned a lot. And by the end of that record, I think I did become a little more direct. I'm like, just say the damn thing. Okay? People just want to know what you're thinking, you know, like you don't have to, doesn't have to be rude or harsh, but like, just say it. You know? Like,
Greg told a great story last week about KD when they're doing Constant Craving, and she just hated the song, absolutely hated it. And they're doing vocal overdubs because they're mixing the record and she hadn't sung a second verse. I was like, all right. And she just left. They're in the middle of doing vocals and she just left. Just hated it. Have we lost Tucker? That's the question. Oh, I heard a little burst of him.
It's trying.
Tucker, do you want to drop out and then and just come back in? I'll tap dance for a bit. So I didn't load the graphic for the "We'll be right back," so you're just gonna have to look at me. There I am. Hey everybody. So that's what I get for telling stories from last week. It's not cool. You guys can all just go watch that. So hopefully that's just a glitch, because we haven't talked about all sorts of stuff.
Right. So while we're waiting for him to come back, just want to tell everybody to get your questions in. If you're watching on Crowdcast, get your questions in right below the video there, and we'll ask Tucker whenever he gets back here.
And I'm just gonna keep an eye on my email and see what he says. Oh yeah, because we're not done with him. We're getting there.
See if I have any questions in here that you could answer.
I could answer a question.
Yeah.
Before we lose everybody.
Well, let's see. Have a very got a bit of a generic one that we could hit real quick. This is from Brian G. And he asks, what are your thoughts on all the digital emulation tech available today? So specifically mic modeling like the Townsend and Slate and UA preamp emulators and stuff.
I don't have a huge amount of experience with the modeling microphones. I mean, I know Greg Wells loves the Slate microphone. I've seen some people have the Townsend, absolutely love it. The UA Unison technology is cool because it does some sort of impedance matching, so it does actually try and load the microphones the right way. I think that's a great way to do it. I mean, if you're to just make something sound like something, well, whatever, but it's to make the thing you plug into it react the way it should.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, look, for the microphones, you'd never buy even one of the things it's modeling for the price that it is.
Yeah.
So it can't be a bad thing, but I don't have personal experience with them. I mean, my approach to buying gear was always, I'm terrified, and at some point I'm going to get found out, and I'm going to have to sell everything. And as it turns out, I had to sell everything because the studio, all my gear was at closed, and I did have to sell everything. So I was not good about keeping up with newer stuff. I bought very little newer stuff. Like I would buy new Eventide processors, or you like digital things that, okay, newer is probably better. But I didn't even check out like early on, like the Vintech stuff and all the other Neve clones. I just didn't bother because I just worried like, no, that's it's going to get me into trouble because I'm going to have to sell everything quick and it'll go down in
Right.
value. So yeah, unfortunately, I'm not the best person to ask with that.
Right.
Let me just
Nice.
see.
That
But I
was
mean, there are a
pretty
lot of
recent
people
that
who
you
love
sold
them.
everything.
Well, you know, when you're fiscally terrified and have imposter syndrome, that's what that adds up to.
All right, let's see.
Wow, we might have lost him. I wonder if his
Yeah.
power went or something, so his internet's down. Let me
I've got another one that you could hit.
All
You wanna
right,
do that?
absolutely. I'm just going to email Tucker while we do that.
Cool. This would probably be fun for Tucker to hit when he comes back too. But this is another one from Brian, and he asks, "What's your favorite mistake or accident that happened during the recording process that ended up creating something awesome?" It's a good one.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I've got a specific like big one. I've heard stories about big ones, like Susan Rogers recording Prince, and one of the power supplies for the console had gone down. So it either didn't have plus 15 volts or didn't have minus 15 volts, whatever. It was the entire console was just distortion, but Prince was ready to play. I'm like, all right, off we go. So, you know, that I think, I mean, for me, when I'm recording a band, I will always try and make the singer sing along with every single take. Even if it's to a click, it doesn't matter. Because the band feeds off it, and what you end up getting with that is all of the ad-libs. And my favorite ones are some of the Chili Peppers ones, where obviously that's not my call to make Anthony sing. I mean, that's Rick's thing at that point. But yeah, all of the crazy scat that sounds like Popeye on acid, that's just Anthony in the moment loving a take and setting something up. I mean, and that's why back on what song was it? I can't even remember what song it was, where there's like a gibberish line in the middle of a verse. And it's just because that's what he always sang. And it got to the point where everyone got so used to it, like, let's not put words there. So I think you can get amazing stuff out of vocalists, especially because they don't think you're going to keep anything from a tracking take. Like the lyrics aren't even done, it's whatever. And so all of that stuff is absolutely amazing.
Wow, yeah, that's a really interesting production technique. I got to do a session for John Paterno while he was producing once, and it was the same thing where the singer was like, you got it down. They're playing with the click. Just have them sing to that. And he was like, no, when I'm in the room, you're singing every single take on every single
and
one.
obviously if you're going to blow the singer really out or there's a reason not to, then you don't. But yes, so many times, you know, it's the take because of the vocal performance, even though you're not going to keep the vocal performance, but it's because you could tell the singer was excited. Like the Duke Spirit record I did, every single song was like that. When Leela went nuts at the end of a song, you knew that was the take. We wouldn't even listen back half the time. We'd just like, yep, that's it, and move on to something else. And if she hadn't been singing, not only would we not really necessarily have known, but I don't think we would have gotten what we got. Because there's nothing that excites a drummer more than hearing his singer just lose it, because
Right.
it's so awesome. So even if all you're keeping is the drums, you get something out of that. That's a really, really big deal. So if you can, I think it's really important, if you're recording live musicians, to have the singer sing along.
Cool tip. That's awesome. How's it looking with Tucker?
Well, I don't know. I haven't heard from him. I'm worried like his internet went down. I got an email from Matt Rossbang. Oh, there he is. He's back.
Nice. Hey.
I have no idea
All
what
right.
happened.
Welcome back.
Well, you've risen from the
All right, I'll let
dead.
you guys carry on.
Well,
My finger tired from restarting my Wi-Fi.
right. Okay, we'll just cover a couple more things, and we can do them relatively quickly. But they're things that are important, and I'm sure there's plenty of stuff that's super important we've skipped too. But then we can get to some questions. So Mavis Staples, that's on the surface a little out of your wheelhouse, but then again, not really.
Very much in the house of what I listen to on my own. Like Staples singers are just some of my favorite musics, those early records. But yeah, that was Matt Ward. M. Ward was producing that, and we're pals. And thankfully, he asked me if I would take part. Again, I came in at the mixing stage, but I did get to play tambourine, and put tambourine on a Mavis Staples record when it's basically like a gospel instrument felt like a lifetime achievement.
Yeah, that's badass. I mean, tambourine on that record is a different level of tambourine than most records.
I mean, not that the playing actually was, but the role of tambourine on her music, it's like that's a spiritual thing.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, this is the quick fire round apparently. So, Avett Brothers.
Man, I'm sorry, but you're hitting on all these that like they weren't start to finish things for me. That was, oh yeah, I just tracked drums for that. Steve Nister was living in Portland at the time, and they wanted him to play. Was Rick Rubin working on that record? I want to say he was.
Yeah, I can't remember if that was the one before he did, or maybe it was. Yeah.
I want to say it was, because I remember just being psyched that there was like one fewer degree of separation from because I've always been, I'm a fan. But yeah, so that was just drum tracking, but which was wild too, because the record was basically all tracked, and they either had placeholder drums or no drums. And adding drums as the last thing can be challenging to really make it feel like it's foundational. But Steve just nailed it, and I leaned heavily on the mono Coles overhead.
Right. Awesome. All right. Well, let's talk a little bit more. We'll come back now to the My Morning Jacket record, because I mean, you talked a little bit about the fact that was just recorded in a big noisy room with no separate control room. But not, you moved pretty quickly, right? Was it 3 weeks of tracking ish?
That sounds right. Yeah. Again, because you can only spend so much time when you don't have a computer, and like the monitoring environment was just ridiculous. Like I did bring my Pro Axe, or no, Jim had bought Pro Axe by then, so we were using his, but we're listening back in a gymnasium with all these huge, massive, thin windows and traffic outside, and just we didn't really know what the sounds we had were. We could kind of tell the performance, because that's just like a little more of a feeling that can translate through a lot of the kind of sonic imperfections. But so I guess if that went quickly, it certainly didn't feel really fast, but because 3 weeks is still a while if you're doing mostly live takes.
Now, was that, as the producer engineer, was it terrifying to not know what you've got, or did you just know whatever it was you were going to make it work?
Well, yeah, it was totally terrifying. But I knew at that point, I knew Jim James well enough. He'd been on a Decemberists record I worked on, and then he'd come to Portland and been on a Lord Beers record I did, and then I'd gone to Louisville and helped him get started on his solo record, his first solo record, and not only just kind of recording, but also like setting him up so that when I left, he could just continue, and like, you know, drums were mic'd and stuff. I knew him well enough, and we totally hit it off, like we'd known each other forever. But you know, he has a tendency, like he likes to tie your hands a bit in the process, just, you know, add to some kind of little struggle that's gonna manifest in, like, you know, some original artifacts and stuff. And just he doesn't like to just go into like a pro studio and just be the next band loading into the pro studio and we're going to make the pro record with all the same pro mics and the, you know, he likes to set up an environment that's like, you've got to come out with it with something unique. Like, obviously just being unique in itself isn't the goal, but like, you know, hopefully it's really good, but also unique. So it was written in stone, right? Like recording there and monitoring there. So I knew that, like, if I thought that he and the band didn't understand all the limitations, you know, it would have been a nightmare. I would have constantly been like, you know, saying like, oh, but this and that, and oh, I wish this, and you guys bear with me, you have to understand this and that. But they knew, like, they were like, no, I mean, we chose this. We know this is totally fucked. That's why we're doing it. So I knew that they knew, so I just kind of embraced it. I was like, it's what we're doing. We're doing it on purpose. And I'm not going to sit here and be like, God, I sure wish that I could, you know, spend an hour on that kick drum sound or something. It was just like, hopefully the levels aren't just pegging so hard that they're distorting, or if they are, it's in a cool way. And, you know, you're just like going by meters. And the band, most of the time they didn't even have headphones, because it just didn't even make sense to be in a room like that. Like the headphones would just make it almost more confusing. So we kept tweaking the way the band was set up for them to hear themselves. You know, we had the vocals in a PA that's just broadcasting live into the room. All the vocals on that record were live, and they were in all the mics. Like every sound is in every mic.
So everybody had chocolate in their peanut butter.
Exactly. Exactly. Thank you for justifying that analogy.
So was the mix process in some ways easier because it was just, this is what we've got, or was it harder because then you were trying to make it conform to something you wanted it to be?
I think it was some of each. So we went to Blackbird. Was it Studio A or B?
Pro Studio?
Yeah, so it was sort of like, let's do the most fucked up, janky thing to track it, and then let's go where we can really see what we have, and we have access to all the tools for whatever we may desire to do to it. I mean, so many decisions are already made at that point, right? Like the bleed and the sounds, but so we went there to that room with that great 80s series Neve. Is it A or B? I forget, but and yeah, in some ways we'd already made a million decisions that they weren't even discussions, right? And both Jim and I were like, we're embracing like all those screwed up things that we can't change. We're embracing that. We already decided that, so we're not going to sit here and whine about it. But yeah, there was also a process of like, oh, so that's the sound we got. You know, that's the vocal sound we have. And you know, determining when do we just run with how crappy it sounds. Like, you know, I mean, Jim might say like, yeah, I know, like I was blowing up the mic because I was right up there on it and all this stuff, but like, that's cool. Like, it's cool on this song. And then there'd be times there'd be little artifacts like that we were like, damn, that's distracting. Like, it sounds like, you know, when he leans into the bass drum, there's a little distortion that's like not the good distortion.
Right.
So, you know, leaning on the modern tools to try to obscure those things. But yeah, so it was easier and harder. It was just a totally unfamiliar process. And I was a little frustrated because it was my first time working with the band, and I just wanted the record to be off the hook. Like, I wanted to make it sound great. I just wanted to do right by them and just be super psyched. And there was part of me that's like, this doesn't really sound like the records I usually make. Like, a lot of these sounds are not what I'm used to, which ended up being great. It was kind of just refreshing, and that's certainly something that's gone on to inform other things I've done since then. Just that general attitude of just kind of like set up some limitations that might add extra character to the recording.
I mean, in a way, I guess it's kind of the bookend to you wanted to multi-mic the drums, and he's saying, put up the coals, man, because then you embrace that, and like, it just completely opens your mind when it works. But on your own, that's too big a risk.
Yeah.
You're not going to decide, let's go record my first record with this band in a fucked up way. There's no way. You would be going right back to the last thing you did that was awesome, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not a reflection on you. I mean, that's exactly what I would do. Maybe you're bolder than me, but it can be really freeing, I suppose. But it's great when you actually carry some of that over.
Totally. Yeah. No, I mean, looking back, it's kind of it's a favorite. I mean, I love the record, and also just the experience was just really special.
It's a great record.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, at first I just didn't know what to think of it because I couldn't get out of my head like all the ways my hands were tied. But eventually, as I got enough separation from the process, I was like, oh yeah, that's so cool. Like, we just could have only made that record there that way.
Well, and it's funny because there's something I was noticing just going through the list you sent me, but then going back through records you've done, and I'd noticed it before, like, you've got and this is that overhead Coles thing, whatever, but there's always a very natural sound to the drums, and especially the kick. Like, there is this crazy amount of sub on the kick that is amazing, and it just wraps you around it, and it's almost the foundation of so many of the records you make. And that record doesn't really have it because it can't. And it's, and I suppose something like that, which it doesn't matter who you're working with, if they're drums, that was a part of the sound of those records. And everything from there on up could be totally different. But it was a real staple of your recording and production technique. And when you've got something like that, it really does inform what other things can do. Even though you can go in a million different directions, that's there. So I'd imagine, and do you find that your drum sounds, like, overall have sort of changed so that there's certain things that were consistent that are now you're not as worried about or anything like that?
Well, I definitely, over time, I kind of graduated. That's maybe not the right word, but I sort of morphed into mono, being much more about mono overheads. But, I might pan the toms, or there's not necessarily just straight mono, but for the overheads, I'm just like, man, it's less phase crap to worry about. And, if you're not getting enough of the ride, move the ride, or raise the ride, or move the mic, or like get a different ride. And absolutely, there are times where I get to mixing, I'm like, man, I wish I had a little more detail on that cymbal. For the most part, I just want to have like as few faders as possible. Ideally, that one, like the Coles, I do try to get it so that all the other drum mics are down. I pull that up, and I'm like, if that's all I got, like, that's pretty cool. Yes, I hope I have a closer kick mic and maybe a closer snare mic or whatever, but that sounds like a drummer playing a good sounding drum kit, And then everything else is just supporting that, like, as needed.
Right.
Like, I don't immediately have the other mics necessarily even up, but I like to have them. I mean, I'll most of the time record closed tom mics and all that stuff, but I do in the beginning try to see how few I can get away with actually monitoring.
Right.
But they're there, like, 2 weeks into it, the band's like, man, I've been meaning to mention like that Tom can't hear it, and it sucks because that's like crucial to that section, you know. I don't want to have to say, oops, sorry, I'm overhead thing.
So, all right, let's talk about at least one more, but I figured we should talk with this because it's the one time we've actually worked on the same record knowingly and on purpose. But let's talk a little bit about the First Aid Kit record.
Yeah, I was huge fans of theirs for years. My kind of history with them, as far as my knowing about them and even my communication with them, goes way back to when Laura Veers was on tour in Europe many years ago. I wish I knew how many, but I don't know. Before even the that YouTube thing where they sang the Fleet Foxes song in the woods that kind of went viral, they gave a CDR to Laura at her show in Stockholm, and she would come home from tour with like a stack of CDs that like fans gave her and stuff, and she didn't really usually want to listen to them, you know, just whatever. She was just like, came home, she was unpacking, she's like, all right, there's these, I don't know, should I just chuck them or whatever? I was like, I want to hear them. Like, all these people intentionally like, well, this is their art, like, and they made a point to give it to you, and you know there's probably going to be some cool stuff in there, and that was one of them. And I thought that these gals got something. I found them on the internet. It was like a super primitive website at the time, but there was one, and I sent them a message. It was just like, hey, you know, I heard your CDR that you gave Laura, and I just love what you do, and would, you know, I don't know if it would ever make sense, but I would love to work with you guys. I haven't done that many times in my life. Like, very few times have I really like reached out. I should probably do it more, but you know, they sent a really sweet note back, and then a year or so later, they were coming through Portland playing a small club show, and they reached out, and we hung out and had dinner, and that happened a few times over the years. And then we kind of Skyped for their couple, like 3 records ago. I think the first one they did with Mike Mo, just sort of like a Skype interview with their dad there. He was sort of always, you know, kind of overseeing everything. So that was an unusual dynamic, but didn't end up getting to do that record. They did a couple great records with Mike, and then now it's time to change it up, I guess, and I got to do it. It's kind of funny. I feel like this happens a lot. I don't know if this has been your experience, but a lot of times if I get to work with an artist that I've admired, I often get them at the moment where they're like, oh, I'm so over that thing I've always done. Now I'm really ready to just do it. But of course I'm completely applauding, and that's what artists should do. That should be their mentality, but it's just hilarious sometimes. Like get some freaking amazing songwriter who's like, I'm ready to make my experimental jazz record, you know? Right. Nah. But not that it was a massive departure for them, but so yeah, that was wild. Like, their dad's the bass player, and he's always kind of in the background, like he's got their ear, he's sort of making decisions, making comments. I always knew when he was speaking in Swedish that, like, you know, it was supposed to hear. And there was a lot of speaking in Swedish. But yeah, so that was unusual. A lot of kind of cooks in the kitchen. You know, that A&R guy at the label, who was awesome, but like was much more hands-on than anything I'd ever experienced. And it was a lot to navigate, like to kind of satisfy all these different people and still just do what I had always done, which is just like, just me and the artists in the room having a creative conversation, making the record that we feel in that moment is the record we're supposed to be making, you know? And then you check your email and you're like, don't forget to make it sound like Fleetwood Mac or whatever, right. You know? Like, oh, guys, does it sound like Fleetwood Mac? No, but let's just say it does. So that was a challenge of that record. And so in some ways, that record doesn't feel like as personal as far as like beginning to end, me and the artist with our vision, just like we wanted to do. But I mean, I'm thrilled with how it turned out, and your mixes were amazing. And actually, it was really helpful for me at that point because there were so many cooks in the kitchen. I think it was good for me to step away from that process because I was getting a little disillusioned with like all the ideas that were being planted in my head from different angles, and it was just a good time to have a fresh set of ears.
Well, and I did want to talk about it because it's also, first of all, you almost always mix your own productions, right? I mean, I can't even think of other examples when you didn't. But I feel like during the process, that record wasn't turning out, and you've even said it, like it didn't feel as much. And this is me. Hopefully it's not uncomfortable at all, but I don't think that the mixes were really what you had in mind, even for where the record had gone to at that point. So even though it may have gone a little bit where you weren't expecting, the record ended up being a different record than what you thought you were making. And what was that like for you to have to step back in a way? I'm just curious because I mean you're super cool about it during the process, but it was a really lengthy, involved mix process as well. And I had to lean back on you to find out, like, hold on a second, how are you panning these things? Like, I was coming back to you for information normally I don't need. And so I'm curious if it was kind of a bummer.
Well, I knew you had like a long, good past relationship too with the A&R person. And, so I was like, I didn't know. I kind of felt like at that point, I was just kind of supposed to go through him for stuff, but really my impulse would be just to call you up and just be like, cool, man, we're doing this together. Let's talk about it. But no, it's not even that the mixes, it was just, I was still kind of just in shock that like this thing had just kind of gotten away from the things that just make it feel really personal, and where I feel like I'm bringing the things that are most valuable from me, because obviously there's a bajillion people that could record it to sound good or produce it in cool ways. And I've just tried to become aware over the years of like, man, do the thing that's you. Like, listen to your own ideas, even if it might seem strange or left field at the time. Like, that's what you bring. That's who you are. That's why you're doing this. That's why people call you. And it was just a little unusual to feel like that there was less of that than I had hoped, like going into the mixing already. So I was just like, God, this process is so unfamiliar and weird. I mean, I honestly, like, I listened back to it the other day when I was making that list for you, and I mean, the mixes are fantastic. It's, how sometimes you just can't, at least in the moment, if you've been hit from so many different angles, and there was management too, who was like kind of trying to play in between all the people, and like you could tell she was talking to the dad, and you could tell she was talking to the label, and tell all the, and I'm like, yeah. So I've been so lucky over the years to just like, even when I've gotten to work on big records, like major label things or whatever, records with really good budgets, there are bands that managed to, like when the Decemberists got signed, it was like, we're an indie band who created this kind of in a DIY way, and we would love to be on Capitol Records, but don't think you're going to come in and start changing it. Like, we're going to keep being us. And they're like, okay, let's do it, and My Morning Jacket, very, total autonomy. Like, they're not answering to anybody. So I've just been, really lucky in that way. I know there are people who have had very different careers, probably people a little older than me, because I think it really used to be a thing, right? Where I've gotten the impression where it was much more common that there was just like a lot of cooks in the kitchen. I don't even know if that's true.
No, I think it is. I mean, labels used to be more involved. Bands never used to just deliver a record. I mean, now most record deals are as if they're just licensing the record. They're not actually record deals, and that didn't used to be the case.
Yeah, I've been very fortunate that way, and fortunate that like people have cared enough about those records that I get to do another one, you know, because I think they'd only give you so many opportunities to just turn in a record if they didn't like it. I have also done the thing, and I won't name names, but like where, you know, someone in the management or the label is like, okay, you guys can do what you want, but this one song, like, this is the single, and so I want you to track it again, and here's why, and here's what we need, and, you know, this tempo, and more of this and less of that. Where, you know, we've looked at each other and we're like, all right, well, we should be psyched that they care enough to do this, and like kind of annoyed, but you know what? Who knows? Maybe they're right. Let's just give it a try. And it's just never worked out. It's always ended up being the song that the band was like, wishes wasn't on the record. It's like a one song that doesn't really represent their vision. Doesn't end up being a hit song either. So all they ended up getting was a diluted vision. So, but I know there are plenty of cases where that's probably worked, right? We're like, yeah, man, the label guy was like, you should say wild horses couldn't drag me away, and chorus. And
yeah, I don't know. I hadn't heard that story. I didn't realize that was the A&R guy, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think in certain genres, maybe because it is about getting the weight of the label behind it, and, you know, its sheer weight of numbers and money can really help break something. But I think in the scene you're working in, yeah, because I think what makes all the records that you make so special is how intimate and personal they are. You always feel like you're listening to the artist, and there's no artifice in it, and there's no pretense, and there's no trying to do something. You're always making the record that you're trying to make. And that's what comes across, and that's what makes people connect with those types of bands, I think. So
yeah, I mean, no one ever calls me to make their big hit record. I mean, I think everyone hopes their record's successful and stuff, right? But it's,
of course,
artistically successful first. It's just like, I want the band to walk away being just so psyched. They're like, oh, you know, hopefully they think it's their best record, and hopefully they think it's a record they haven't made yet.
Yeah.
That's like all we can do. I think that's all I can do. That's the only thing I do. And when I get off of that path and start thinking about like, well, maybe if we do it more like this, more people will like it, or it's just always gets me in
look,
trouble.
and you can't. No, I think it's the, yeah. I mean, being a producer is having an opinion, and the producers whose records sell a ton are the ones whose opinions line up with other people. I mean, I don't think there are too many producers who are really successful who are making records they don't like, but they know how to make them. I mean, that's just not. It's really not possible. People smell that from a mile away.
Yeah, it's true. And you just, yeah, I mean, I think we're driven by like enthusiasm and inspiration and passion and all that. And if we're faking it.
Yeah. Well, look, let's not end on the First Aid Kit record. I want you to pick a record that we haven't talked about, because there are hundreds. So is there anything in particular like you wanted to talk about? I mean, you could go back early. I mean, even Mudhoney or something like that, but Camera Obscura. There's a bunch of stuff we haven't talked about. So if there's something you want to do, and then we'll bring Mark on and answer a few questions, and then it's Beer 30 over here.
Beer 30, seriously. It's going to be that here soon, too. Man, I should probably have like my discography in front of me. It was really hilarious because when you asked me to send you like some tracks that I'd worked on that I liked, I literally was just like, I don't know if this ever happens to you, but it kind of drew a blank. I just go to All Music.
Always.
Like, oh yeah, that was
always
cool.
Every single time. I have no idea. Well, I mean, I think it was only just mixing, but have we mentioned Spoon yet? Because they're super cool.
Oh right, that was just mixing, but they're super cool. Yeah. I mean, and Sonic Adventurers. Yeah, that was awesome.
Yeah, I got to mix one song for those guys at one point, but all I did was fanboy about Mountain to Sound. Do you know that track?
Yeah.
That's one of my favorite recordings ever. And it's 4-track and noisy as hell, and it fades just as it's going somewhere really interesting, and it's genius. Absolute genius.
Yeah, so they're commenting on the mix, and you're like, so anyway, tell me how you
tell me how you did it. Exactly. Every email I sent them back had a question about that song.
I love it. Yeah, I did some fanboying too when I mixed that stuff, but tried to play it just cool enough that.
Oh, I gave up on trying to be cool enough. Well, should we get to some questions then? Because let's bring Mark in. So he asked one while you were rebooting your Wi-Fi. That was just like what's one of the mistakes or happy accidents that you remember and loved the most, or something, or just what's an example of one like that? And I was basically just talking about, like, I always want the vocalist to sing along with the takes, because that's when you know you've really got something, and then it's all the coolest vocal ad-libs come out of those takes and stuff like that. But I didn't have like a major one with the whole band doing something crazy that ends up being a hook or...
God. Man, yeah, crazy stuff. I'm not, like, some specific example isn't just roaring to mind, but I mean, there have been plenty of times where when you're working fast and you're like, all right, we'll just do a run through because I need to check levels and that kind of thing, and then you realize that where you thought you patched the vocal mic, it's actually that mic in the corner, but like, and it was blowing up and it kind of caught the vocal sound in a really cool way, and just stuff that you're like, why don't I ever do this on purpose? This is so cool.
And then you never do it again.
And I always say, like, going into each record, like, I'm going to make bolder choices and all that. And, I mean, I think some of that sneaks in there, but I also want to be able to work quickly and want the band to come in. If they're playing great on the first couple takes, I don't want them to be like, how come you ran my vocal through a garden hose? Like, that was the take, man. That's a tricky balance. I love recordings that make bold choices and that feel experimental and that kind of thing, but it's a process of seeing how far the band is willing to go too. Like, how adventurous do they want to get? Sometimes they're like, man, this sounds good, but like, feel free to go for it, make it weirder. And other times they're like, sound a little weird to you, like. I'm like, okay.
Well, and I think that's a little bit of a misconception sometimes, especially if you're known for making like cooler sounding record, whatever, is that somehow that's just on you, and then the band is just along for the ride, and they can't ever be along for the ride ever. They can decide to come on your ride, but then they're driving too, and it's always got to be that collaboration. And like you say, it's more important to be able to actually record what the hell they're doing than to say, hold on a second, I need another hour on this room mic, I'm just going to be cool. Like, you can't do it. And I was thinking about, there was a great, like, endless article that came out about Peter Gabriel's fourth solo record. And that when he met with Steve Lillywhite, the conversation was, I don't want any cymbals. And Steve's like, what? And then Jerry Marotta was like, what? But they embraced it all the way through, and there is not a single cymbal on that record. But that informed every single thing that happened with the arrangement on every song.
And it opens up a different kind of sonic space that's available for other things.
Yeah, but that came from the artist. I mean, I think if you walked into a Peter Gabriel record and you said as the producer, we're not going to have any cymbals on this record, like, if he's not on board right away, there are going to be cymbals on the record,
Right. Yeah, that becomes a thing. Those stories get passed down. I've definitely been part of projects where people are like, hey man, I heard, Peter Gabriel had no cymbals on this record. Like, let's do some songs like that or something.
It's like, okay, but you got to write it that way too. Like, you can't magically take the cymbals away. Cymbals they exist for the origin of the modern drum kit is one of the things that fascinates me the most. Like, how the fuck did that happen?
Right. Kick
drum, snare drum with rattly things, hi-hat, crash cymbal, toms, like, what? Yeah. That's proof of alien life to me. Like,
only things on one of them, but it definitely needs to be on that one.
Yeah. Anyway, sorry, I digress.
Oh no, I'm with you. I think it's also important to question those things sometimes, because it's like, well, there are more options to what the drums can do on this besides choo choo pa choo 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 pa or whatever.
But how
Which
badass is that beat 90% of the time?
badass.
Why?
Yeah, right. It's been figured out over the years.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, Mark. I'm
That's
going to
awesome.
shut up now.
Okay, all right. So we got some pretty good questions in here. One, there's a bit of a debate going on in the chat about what the mysterious covered box is behind you, Andrew. And right now, everybody's pretty sure that it is the Lost Ark.
No. You should be able to tell from the little wooden front. It is the only bit of Neve I still own. It's my BCM 10.
Sidecar.
Well, it's
I'll
not
put
even a
it in as a
sidecar
Lost
now.
Ark.
That's my console. Like, that's it.
Yeah, yeah.
And
And if you take the cover off of it,
can I just say that I've spent some time trying to make my stereo better, like to listen to records and things like that. And I swapped the amp out and I got a preamp, but it's a good preamp, so it doesn't have any EQ, and it was really bumming me out. And I actually took a pair of Neves downstairs. So I've got a pair of 1073s on my stereo right now. I was feeling really bad for spending like $1,000 on my stereo, and now I've got 10 grand worth of EQ on it. So, and it still doesn't sound right, but whatever. But yeah, BCM 10.
amazing. Nice. Yeah. Don't lift the cover off though, because it will be like the end of the Indiana Jones movie.
It will all melt.
Even though we're watching online. Yeah. All of us will melt. Okay. So our first question comes from Scott Bird. And he says, Tucker, you've worked with some of the finest vocalists of our time, in my opinion, mentioning Katie Lang, but also Jim James, First Aid Kit, Death Cab, etc. Could you talk about how you showcase the vocal performance in the overall production? And an example, making space, getting great performances, and such. Just thanks. Great session today.
But it's an intuitive thing. You just start with, I just want to kind of be blown away when I hear the voice coming through the speaker. Like I mentioned earlier, absolutely happened with Katie. So Katie Lang brought her own. She brought a U87 of hers. I have 4, but she brought hers, and I could have not used it, but I was like, yeah, she brought it because it's something she's comfortable with. And just literally the first sound I heard come through my speakers, I just couldn't believe that was coming through my speakers, And in a way, it just sounded like some incredible classic record, but it almost sounded better than that too, because it was, it was actually happening. It wasn't being dithered. It wasn't, but it was just as pure and raw as it gets. So definitely try to start from that place and make the singer comfortable. Some singers really like to police themselves, and others really like to be told, like, all right, I'm just going to go for it and not think about it. And you just tell me, like, you just make notes of what we need to hit again. I'll go back and hit it again. Like Katie is somebody who she's done this a long time. She can have her way with vocals. Like a couple times I remember when I was first working with her, and I was even a little nervous to give any kind of critical feedback, but it's kind of what I'm used to doing. I think more often than not, people are kind of hoping for it. I was like, yeah, what, it sounded amazing. It went a little flat in these couple spots on these words. Oh yeah, it went blue. That was on purpose. And kind of later, as I got used to it, I realized, oh yeah, that sounds incredible. But I just sort of felt like, well, I need to tell her like something that we could do better. But there wasn't. With a singer like that, I usually like to if it's feeling good, just do 3 passes and just like, let me do a comp. And probably there's a conversation where we both agreed, like the second one seemed to just have the most stuff. So that's the one, and anything that's missing, we go check the others. Creating space in the mix, it's just different every mix. Depends how dense the instruments are. But yeah, I mean, trying different reverbs. I forever was just defaulting to the EMT 140, but Katie kind of had an aversion to that. It's just because it's kind of got a cloudy thing, and she's used to sort of a little bit more of an airy, kind of sparkly thing. So I got some Bricasti settings up for her, and we kind of shoot them out or sometimes blend them. And actually by the end of the record, she was like, oh, actually kind of prefer the plate on this one. And that was cool. But man, I really don't know any tricks, that just work every time for that stuff. If I feel like the band is totally overwhelming the vocal, like while we're tracking it, and I just can't imagine the vocal commanding the track, it's, maybe it's a sound thing, or maybe, sometimes something double the vocal, if that seems appropriate for the song. Mute some instruments that the vocal seems to be fighting with and see if you actually miss them. Sometimes I'm shocked how little I miss something that I had gotten very used to. Somebody like Jim James too, like it's important for him to just feel free to just try stuff, and he sings it really different every time. I feel like Katie kind of zeroes in on all right, here's what I want to do, here's where I want to pull the note blue, I want to save that high one for this spot, and Jim's vocals are really different every time, and he'll take 5 steps back sometimes for certain sections, and his thing is so feel oriented that it's usually just like the one performance that we choose where he was in it and I was feeling it. Sometimes we'll punch something for pitch if we even can, but the way the My Morning Jacket records are made, usually we've kind of committed ourselves because it's bleeding into a lot of other stuff.
Awesome. Cool. Thanks. Okay, so let's go to our next one. And this one is from Oliver. And Oliver asks, I love your work on Reckless Burning. Such a great atmosphere. Can you tell us something about the recording and mixing process for that record?
Okay, so that was the Jesse Sykes record that I mentioned early on. That was like one of the first things where I really kind of got to really get my paws on there production-wise. And of course, she brought great songs, and she had just started what's become a really long collaboration with Phil Wancher, who had been in Whiskey Town previously, the guitar player. So it's kind of the two of them and me. And, I was really into trying to find some extra sounds we could add to just create a sense of dimension and not just have it be count it off, strum, verse, chorus, verse. So we put feedback on the opening track, and it just ended up, I think the opening track's Reckless Burning. It just brought the imagery to life. It suddenly put this thing that felt maybe borderline pedestrian. It just added a ton of dimension and made it feel super weird and spooky and a little bit dangerous, and not what you'd expect to hear on a soft spoken singer-songwriter record. And yeah, those guys, that was one of the first times I ever worked on a record where the artist also was sometimes more meticulous than I was. And at times that was frustrating because I felt like, maybe do we already have this? But I learned that she had, both of them, when they wanted to keep pushing for something, in the end, I saw that they were right. We did end up making something better. And that was a big, it's not like the first time I had ever encountered that concept, but that was a real tangible moment where I learned early on, thankfully, that, try to work with artists whose vision you believe in, and, help sort through the best ideas, but don't just think because it wasn't something you thought of, or you're not even sure how it's going to turn out. If you try the thing, don't shoot it down. That's huge. And I try to say to people at the beginning of the record making process, just to kind of free everybody up. I'm look, we should try any ideas that anyone has that there's time for, obviously kind of within reason, but these are mature people that get it. Look, there'll be some things I want to try that I'm not positive it's going to work out, but we'll try it. We won't spend a lot of time on it. If it's not happening, we'll move on. No big deal. And same for you guys. I want you to speak up, try stuff, because, you know, when I find myself just playing it safe, like, well, let's just stick to these things. We kind of know what the result's going to be. It will be pretty good. There won't be anything that could alienate somebody, you know. That's a drag too, because I hear those records back where maybe I feel like I was more in that mindset, and I'm like, sounds like a pro record or something, you know, but like it doesn't care. It's not making me care about it. So yeah, I've just try to figure out like what, you know, what's unique about the people and highlight those things.
I think also trusting the artist, like you were just saying, is a big deal. Like sometimes you need to know when not to go down a rabbit hole, but there have been a lot of times where the artist wants to do something like, I don't get this. And then even when you finish, like, well, I'm not so sure. That's just different. Is it even better or worse? I have no idea. But it was important enough to them that you've got to see that through. And a lot of times it is better, but you've got to get there to even find out. And on your way there, it sucks. Right.
It's really freeing for me to just be like, we can try stuff and we'll try it as quickly as we can, so no one gets bummed out if it's like, oh man, we tried your like distorted vibes idea and like it didn't really count. Like,
well, distorted vibes always works. That's
terrible. Everyone knows that it works.
Nice. Okay. Do you have time for one more?
Sure.
All right.
A little coffee in my.
Nice. Okay. This one comes from Eva, and they ask, did you have any specific approaches when recording Carrie Lowell and Sufjan Stevens? I'm so impressed by the detail and raw emotion captured in those recordings.
Well, again, I'm going to give just so much credit to the artist. I mean, Sufjan, he's never made a bad record. And he came out with just like it's just a completely open book as far as being up for trying things. That was really wild. So what happened was, it wasn't like, hey, Tucker, I'm going to come out. I have these 11 songs and we're going to make a record. He's like, I have a hard drive filled with like the beginnings of songs, song ideas, some that, you know, many of which he'd even forgotten existed. And he's like, I'm kind of feeling a little lost. Just want to come out and I need someone to help me just like start opening things up and going through things and seeing which ones like we're feeling excited about. And then in that moment, then I'll go in and I'll start working, you know, doing more work on them, trying to flesh them out more. So I feel like we worked on probably at least 20 songs, some kind of start to finish, some we continued on things that were there. But then, you know, when the time ended, a couple of weeks, because he works pretty quickly too, he took the hard drive back home and, you know, I think it took him a while to digest everything that had happened, but he then went to his friend, Thomas, Google him, great, brilliant guy who just helped sort through it again and take it to the finish line. But it was wild. Like, and I remember some incredible songs that I couldn't believe weren't on the record. But I think the way he works is he's just making songs. He's not making a record and then starting a new record. It's just making stuff and then figuring out, let the record reveal itself, you know, the little themes and stuff. I do remember that it felt like about 6 of the songs that we worked on mentioned Oregon. And I thought, all right, well, I don't want to say it because he doesn't want to say it, but Oregon, no, he was doing the States albums for a while. Mm-hmm. And there were people were speculating that he was going to do all of them. And I kind of sensed that we were doing that, but that he didn't want to say it. But it turned out we weren't doing it. Or maybe we were, and it just hasn't come out yet.
There's a great parallel in a totally different way of that, just like here are a million song ideas and now it's time to find the ones that make the next record. There's a great interview with Woody Allen about writing movies where he's just got a drawer full of scraps of paper with ideas for movies, and once a year he pulls them all out, he spreads them out on the bed, picks one, writes a movie, and the rest go back in the drawer along with whatever he comes up with that year. Get them all out the next year. Yeah, and that's that same thing of just always having all the germs you've ever come up with, and then at the moment deciding, all right, these are going to crystallize and become whatever the next thing is.
And just enough in that initial moment that it can kind of reveal the rest of itself when the time is right. Yeah, that's wild. It also can be overwhelming, which I think is exactly why he was like, I need to get out of New York. I need to go somewhere else with somebody else, and just like, someone who's never heard this stuff, who doesn't have any hangups or any baggage or any pre-existing opinions about it. So that was cool. Amazing. I do remember, just on a technical note, because I'm very glad this hasn't been a wildly technical interview, because I don't really feel like that's the best thing to offer. But I was all about the RCA BK5 at the time. I mean, I actually still am, but I was just like, I'm going to put that on any singer who comes through here. And he fell in love with it and ended up buying one and doing all the vocals to that on that record, which actually I think it started. I got one initially, having never heard it, but when we were planning the second My Morning Jacket record I got to work on, and I was like, I need to show up with some kind of wild card tools, because I think Jim gets psyched when he sees like not just the same old stuff up, and so do I. But I sort of need permission sometimes to do that, right? So I just got a handful of things that I thought might be cool. They weren't too expensive. I'll take a chance on it. And BK5 to us, he fell in love with it, as did I, and it was for the vocals on most of it. The second My Morning Jacket record I worked on, which was called The Waterfall. But
awesome.
That's kind of now, if I set up a mics in advance for vocals, it'll be probably some tube condenser like a 67 or 47, and the BK5 and maybe a SM7 or something, right? If you just kind of have to quickly see which flavor is gonna put you closest out of the gate. Mm-hmm. That's sort of my third in my trio.
Nice. Well, those just went up a lot on eBay.
Well, they actually have gone up since I became obsessed with them. And luckily I bought two before they went up a lot. And now AEA has a version, which I haven't heard. And it costs, I'm sure it's amazing, so totally worth it. But I think it's a little more than what the used ones are. So, just at the right time, right place, I'll get one. Although I keep telling myself buying gear.
Yeah.
I believe Vance Powell used that on his Start to Finish series. We did a series with Vance Powell. It was a band, everything from setting up the mics all the way to the final mix. And soon we're going to do a mastering video on it too. Really, really fun series. But anyway, long way of saying that he used a BK5 on a guitar amp, I think it was. So.
The old one? Not the new 8?
Yeah, the RCA. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. Vance, I'm psyched to steal some of his tricks that he revealed when I watched that.
So fun. There's so many in there.
Pretty fearless.
Yeah, badass.
And he went, I mean, I don't know, Andrew, maybe you and he are tied for like the beard award.
I don't know, man. His beard is so much longer than mine. Like mine will not grow longer than this. This is just what it does.
Down to the little point thing, right? The super actual width. Yeah.
Yeah, and I always thought that's what my beard would do, but apparently they're like eyebrows. They know how long they want to be. So maybe when I'm 80 and the hair's coming out of my ears as well, maybe then the beard will go long. There won't be anything left on top, but, that's whatever. It's like conservation of hair. I got to lose it up there to get it down here.
Oh, man.
The resource. Amazing. There was the Waterfall album came up in that last thing, and there was a question that was asking if you could tell more about the mixing and production of that record. Do you have anything else that you want to share about that one?
Well, I will just add that in keeping with the theme of kind of trying to create some limitations and record in a way and in an environment that will be something that they've never done before, we sort of volunteered to be the guinea pigs for a studio that's in Stinson Beach, California, north of San Francisco, called the Panoramic House, that actually wasn't even named at the time. But the owner is a friend of mine, and he had told me he was building it, and I knew that the Jacket guys wanted to, we wanted to find a cool, weird, different place to go, and they knew they wanted to get away from home. We literally were looking at caves. There was this underwater structure somewhere that we found online. I don't think it was even in the United States, but under the ocean, that was getting kicked around. We tried to cover all the extremes, but for practical reasons, many of them didn't come to be. So we ended up there, and it's basically just a house, but with the most incredible view. You're just behind you are Mount Tamalpais, and it's just straight up, and you're halfway down it, and straight down is just ocean as far as you can see. It really just feels like the end of the earth in the best way. Wow. So that was tricky. The struggle there was that we were basically the first band to record there. So we were finding all kinds of things that didn't work, and tape machine went down in the middle of it, and we're an hour plus from the nearest city. So getting a tech out there on short notice was basically impossible. And so we ended up having to take some days off for reasons like that. But we tracked just a bunch of songs, 20 something songs. And, some of the others probably see the light of day sometime sooner than later. But that was kind of there were a bunch of unfinished song ideas. The band hadn't played most or any of the songs before we got there. Most of them were voice memos that Jim had. Sometimes it would just be one section or a refrain or something. And so we spent, more time than one might normally spend making that record, because there was a lot of discovering the songs and finishing the songs and giving the band time to really inhabit them. But that was a blast. It was kind of weird. So they were playing in this room that just looks out over the most beautiful view you can imagine. And I was down in this little basement with no window, low ceiling. It's just didn't really seem fair, but
like the early days.
Except I think all my basements had at least one window. One didn't have even one.
Wow.
For them up through the mics being whoa, isn't this just amazing? Isn't it beautiful being here? And I'm through the talk back, no, it's not.
Well, see, you could have given up all your beautiful monitoring to just get up there in the room with them again, but
I know,
yeah.
Next.
Yeah. Awesome, man. Tucker,
well,
this has been amazing. Thank you so much. I know
Absolutely.
there's a lot going on in everyone's lives, so to get this much time from you is really amazing. It's really good to hang out too.
Likewise. No, it's a nice break from everything else. Break from being stuck at home and having a lot of my records canceled due to the pandemic.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's why we've got time to chat. So we'll look on the bright side, at least for today. So,
well, thanks for having me.
Of course, man. Thanks so much
for your time.
And next week, if anyone's interested, it's Bruce Botnick. So we'll be talking Doors, because that's fun too.
Amazing.
So
I'm in.
All right. Excellent.
Amazing.
Awesome,
Cool.
man. Thanks, everybody.
Take
See
care.
you next week.
Okay.
Bye.
Hey, guys. Awesome.